about it. All right, now I'm very excited about this. So we're going to talk about Rive. Have you boys used Rive yet? Come on. Not yet. I know.
No.
It's not really your wheelhouse. I totally get it. I get it.
You're making me feel the FOMO.
Yeah, I get it.
I got another job, man. You know,
No, you're not paid to
for
use
you,
Rive.
right?
Yeah. Okay. So
Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. That doesn't stop
that's
me
true.
from
Yeah,
doing
you do a
whole
lot of
bunch
things you're not
stuff.
paid to do.
But
yeah. So Rive. So where do we
Yeah.
start here? So I think for the last 2 years I've been as hyperbolic as I possibly can about Rive, and you know there's been very few times in my life where I have like 100% total certainty that I'm right about something. Like even if I sound very confident, I'm often like half sure that I'm wrong, and I'm just talking out of my ass. I assure you I am not in this case. Okay, so Rive, I've said it before, it's the most important motion design app that's come out in the last decade. And the reasons, just for recap, is because and at this point I can safely say it has replaced Flash. It does everything Flash used to be able to do, but it's better, it's faster, it's more secure, it's supported by every platform, parts of it are open source, and it's just designed for the modern things that need to have animation on them. And like going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation with what is motion design, right? Motion design as a term is used every day by people working on apps and car displays and AR and VR and all these things that have to run in real time. They have to be updatable really easily. You need developers to be able to talk to it easily with like a bunch of different languages. And you need all this complexity. And there's been this huge problem up until Rive came out, where when you have huge complexity plus motion plus code, the process of actually deploying the final product is so painful and tedious, and revising it is a nightmare, that it just really means there's going to be less motion because it's just too big of a liability to include it. And Rive has completely solved that problem. So at this point, Rive has basically replaced Flash, but it just goes so much further. And so the reason I keep just gushing about it is because what it unlocks is motion to be able to live literally anywhere. And the two pieces of that are you need motion design, and then you need some developers to like implement the actual thing and tie it into whatever else is happening, right? And what's really cool is that Rive has released some features this year where you don't need developers for a lot of that stuff. Actually, it's almost like Flash, where like if you're a little bit on the technical side, and it's a lot easier now with AI, you can, but you can design, you can animate, you understand how the state machine works, you can build interactions. You now have all these tools built right into Rive to make basically full-blown games. And then you can also set things up so a developer can then pipe in whatever they want. So if you're developing the UI for a video game or a car or a museum installation or a live broadcast package, it doesn't matter. You can build the whole thing and you can test it and see exactly how it's going to work. And then you can like tell the developer, this trigger that makes this whole animation happen is called this. And then they can trigger it whenever they want. That is massive, 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 like opening into a massive bag of money, basically. Okay. If I'm just going to be blunt about it.
My name's Joey Judkins. I am the director and high torchbearer at We Ride at Dawn, which is Rad Studio. And you can check out our work at rad.work, which is WRAD.work. I love Rive. While it's not all I use, sadly, it is all I want to use. But it's one of those things where once I got into Rive, I saw just how different and how fluid and how much better it felt to be working in something like it, and how much creativity it sparked in me, and just the kind of output I was able to produce with a tool like that was just invigorating. And I hadn't felt that in such a long time that I was, I think it was just a matter of, I think it's time for me to try something different. We rarely ever use After Effects at Rad. We've tried to be very clear in our focus, but occasionally a client will have a need for an ad or video related to something they're promoting, and that's when we would turn to After Effects. You know, when you're talking about anything for YouTube, Pinterest, Meta, so like Instagram or Facebook, LinkedIn, those are where ads would exist. And I've asked the Rive team, this would be a great place for interactive content, right? It'd be so cool to do an ad, even for some of these clients that we've worked with before. So I used to work with Scott's and Miracle Grow all the time, and they'd have a bunch of little videos that people would watch that they're selling a product with, and it's like, that's fine, but wouldn't it be cool if you were on Pinterest or Facebook or Instagram and these ads were actually like interactive, and you could sort things, and you could plant some seeds, and I don't know, I just feel like Rive would be a great opportunity to make ad content for those platforms. I did ask Rive if there's any plans to bring like a Rive runtime to those platforms. And it sounds like the tech is all there to make it happen, but it's just a matter of those platforms adopting Rive. So honestly, I think it's just kind of a matter of time. And hopefully we will see that because, obviously that creates even more opportunities for Rive. So each program solves completely different problems, and they're for completely different markets. And I know Rive has said this before, but I don't know if they've put this sharp of a pin on it. I'm going to do that. Rive, I know they're not trying to be like After Effects. Rive isn't trying to be like After Effects, except where After Effects was trying to be like Rive. So After Effects was trying to create web, anywhere where After Effects is trying to make web-ready animations for interactive design. So Lottie. Like think Lottie. That's where Rive is clearly better than After Effects, and that's the tool you should be using, not After Effects. So anytime anyone asks for Lottie animations, it's like, well, why would you want Lottie? It's like, well, we want it to be responsive and lightweight, and it's like, well, there's a better tool now. And so that's where I would direct people. Anyone who's kind of stuck in Lottie land, I would say time to switch to Rive. But anyway, for everything else though, like for high-end motion, cinematic motion, compositing, linear animation, really anything that's meant to be a video as an end product, that's After Effects, right? After Effects is the tool. Where do the tools cross over each other? So I'd say anytime I'm designing with 2D vectors, making 2D character animations, rigging, making type animations, animating UI, I'm in Rive only. And I have no need for After Effects anymore for any of that stuff. And so I feel frustrated, in fact, when I'm in After Effects, when I'm trying to do something like any of that stuff, because it just, the tools are better now in Rive. And the real distinction is that companies who need Rive are making apps, products, games, and websites, and they need their animation to be interactive and responsive.
Rive has incredible potential. I've used it quite a bit to just create animations, to create concepts, to just understand the tool a little bit better. I haven't used it yet in an end-to-end process where we're actually implementing Rive into an actual product, but hopefully that's something that will happen very soon. With the scripting feature, from all the things that I've seen, it really opens the window to just really do a lot of amazing things. It helps the Rive interface and the editor kind of get out of the way. The editor, I feel like, has gotten a little bit claustrophobic as they've added a lot of new features, which I know that they're going to be cleaning that up soon. But that allows you to just kind of like get to the bare bones coding and just make whatever you want to happen. And having an AI coding agent there just helps just speed up that workflow exponentially. So that I'm very excited about, because in just like the product design world, the closer you can make your prototype or your mocks or your concept closer to the real thing, the better, because then you're running into all the limitations that an engineering team would already run into if you just like handed them a video mock. And so you get to run into that as the designer and saying like, oh, this doesn't actually work. The technology doesn't actually do this. And so it helps you create more realistic ideas, but then also push engineering teams to say, hey, this is actually possible here in this like web code. How can we translate this into like iOS Swift or Jetpack Compose or something like that, so that you're actually able to implement it into a actual live app?
The companies that need After Effects animators are making videos, like period. That's what they're making. So if you're I mean, I don't know if there's a better way to say that, honestly. It's just that there are now different markets for these motion design outlets. I would say, though, there's a big jump that you have to make when you become a Rive artist or a Rive animator. And it's that you have to sort of shift your mind from making things for viewers to making things for users. So you're always thinking about the user and how is the user going to experience this? What happens when X happens? Like when you roll over this, or when you hover on this, or when you click on this, what happens? What's the next thing that happens? What does the user experience? And so, yeah, you're not just making a video anymore where you press play and hope that the person watches it all the way to the end to see what the end product is, or the call to action, or whatever that the video was designed to do. It's engaging a user throughout an experience. I know I'm not the only person who thinks that and who is constantly learning new things, like trying to learn new things. I've been a motion designer forever, and so I've jumped in and out of all kinds of software. I loved learning ZBrush a few years ago, and I feel like I got to a point that I was getting good at it. I loved learning 3D character animation, back in 2016, 2017, when I felt like I was kind of getting good at that. I just feel like with so many directions you can go in the field of motion design, there are endless tools you can pick up and try. So it's fun. It's fun to learn new things. That's why you should bother to learn Rive. You may find that you have a knack for it and that you really like it and that you're good at it. For me, Rive did two things. One, it offered a new tool that sparked a lot of creative energy in me to make things that I had never done before. I picked up like so many skills over the years being a generalist, right? So I did 3D character rigging, character animation, 2D animation, design, even some hand-drawn animation every now and then. And Rive was sort of this single tool that allowed me to flex a lot of those skills. The rigging in Rive feels kind of like Duik a little bit, but it's also has a lot of 3D-ness to it. Like there's weights and constraints and stuff. And I was just like, man, this feels like 3D. It's just like what I was doing in cinema, but now it's like, it's this whole other thing. And every time I opened it, a new idea like was popping into my head. It's just like, instead of making a character that animates to a voiceover, I can make a character that interacts with you in real time. And then the mouth can move to real time text to speech with Rive-based inputs. Maybe I can, instead of a video that explains how you use a product, maybe we can make a step-by-step interactive experience that walks you through it. Like, maybe with some slick animation and transitions and stuff, with like maybe some fun little delightful moments that pop in that sort of keep the user interested. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff when you're opening up that's what happened to me, at least when I opened up Rive. I was getting these like sparks of energy and creative ideas, just writing them down and hopefully creating enough demand even that people would want to hire me, to like help me make these things for our company or for our studio or whatever. The second thing that Rive did for me was that it unlocked a whole new area of motion design that I had never worked in before. And one that I think is still sort of in its infancy and it's flourishing with opportunities. So if you're looking for like a shift away from video-based animation and wanting to get into product development, apps, games, web technology, then Rive is the tool to learn. Rive's the tool. It is crazy how much Rive has added in the last year. Layouts actually came late last year, and I think people are still not fully grasping their true power yet, but they will. I mean, so any kind of interactive menus, particularly user menus or like game UIs, they make heavy use of Rive's layouts, and that's super powerful. If you're making UIs, like 100%, layouts was a huge deal, but it is a little bit like kind of late last year. The biggest things they've added this year, in my opinion, have been vector feathering and data binding. It wasn't that long ago, okay, that in order to get a decent drop shadow, you had to export an image of one as a PNG out of Figma or whatever, and then plop it behind the vector graphic to make that drop shadow. Now, I feel like it's really unlocked our design capabilities to have built-in vector feathering. Just love it. And then I'd say data binding is the biggest thing yet. we know scripting is coming and it's going to make things even more powerful, but even just the way data binding allows us the full capability of animating during runtime and manipulating animation during runtime. And there's even some little things in Rive when you're just animating in Rive. So not even thinking about the runtime side of data binding, but within Rive. So where you might use a script in After Effects to do things like a number counter, now with data binding in Rive, it's even easier than that to just make a number counter. Or one thing that's like something I use all the time, which is I'll sometimes bind the ends of a gradient on a shape in Rive to other layers. You can only do that with data binding. So you have to find the position of the gradient start and then find the position of the gradient end, and you can sort of bind those to other layers. It's sort of like also kind of like how Espresso rigs worked, where you can have a driver and a driven and just have those things connected to nodes. And but I feel like Rive sort of makes it really easy to do that with data binding. I think they've drastically opened up the possibilities for Rive in the design space and in web technology. And I think that's increased the demand for people who know how to use it, especially for those who know how to use the sort of technical side of Rive. Okay, so RAD was meant to be an interactive animation partner. So we work with brands, agencies, and even other studios. So we worked with Cream Studio and Bien, and the idea is that we would bring an interactive component to any projects that they were working on when needed. So mainly an execution partner, I'd say. We want to get into the earlier stages of things, getting to more design, helping with like creative direction for design, interactive design projects. But at this point, we're still we're just starting. So it's we're coming alongside agencies, studios, brands who already know that they need interactive animation, and so we are their execution partner, interactive animation partner. I will say I never really had the desire to start my own studio when I was a generalist. I think the thought would come into my head and I would talk to folks about it, and it always just seemed like this was sort of just what people do. You know, when they get to a certain point, they start a studio. You know, it's like, well, you're aging into this industry. Maybe you should start a studio. It's just like, well, okay, well, but why? Like there was never like the motivation just wasn't enough. That motivation wasn't enough. Just because it's something that people do wasn't enough for me to really answer the why question. I just didn't feel like I really had anything to offer that was different or better than other studios sort of doing the same thing. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, well, do you want to work with this studio or do you want to work with Joey? It's like, I don't know. It never really made sense to me. When Rive came along, there was a great enough spark of creativity that it lit in me, compounded with what felt like a rush of demand for interactive animation, that I felt like I really could deliver, and that we could really deliver. A team that I could build could deliver on these this new, fresh kind of way of doing motion design. So that was the first time. That was the first time I really felt like I had something different to offer, that I could form a studio around it, and so I did. We have big dreams. We have some big dreams at RAD beyond just the client work. We are working on an app that's for nonverbal communication. So I have a child who's nonverbal autistic, and he has this app that he uses that's it's called an AAC app, which is the term is augmented and alternative communication device. And so you might see kids with these, but it has little icons on it and they can speak with it if they're not capable of forming the words themselves. A lot of these kids have the ability, and adults have the ability, to use these as communication devices. So they'll form the sentences that they need. I want water. I want to go on a walk. You know, all that kind of stuff using the little devices. And it looks kind of like an iPad, and the app is sort of like an iPad app. But I got to tell you, like with a child who uses one of these, and as a parent who I've tried to learn how to use one of these, the apps are awful. They're terrible. they're not well designed. They don't look good. They're not fun. They're not intuitive. The icons illustrations are bad. They're really bad. And there's no animation. There's no, like any parent who tries to use it, it's like you have to take a class just to learn how to use the device. And kids kind of they pick it up and learn it through like muscle memory, but it's really not that intuitive, And so I just felt like there was this moment where this is like early in my Rive days, in fact. So 2024, I was watching my kid use it and I was trying to learn it. I was like, man, someone needs to make a better version of this app. And that's when I kind of realized it's probably going to have to be me. I'm going to have to make a better version of this AAC app. That's animation forward. I hate to say the Duolingo of AAC apps, but that is pretty much what it needs to be, right? For it to really change the landscape of nonverbal communication. But yeah, we want to get into that kind of stuff. We want to make our own products. We want to make games, or at least get into making like game UI stuff. I mean, that's some really, really fun stuff. So yeah, that's the sort of thesis and the reason that we exist, I'd say, is to help people create really fun and exciting experiences using interactive animation. So I'll just say this. I trust the Rive team. They are doing the coolest things. And I'd say like all of the other things that they've already done, I know that their scripting engine is going to be a game changer. Everything's been a game changer already. This is just going to be another game changer, right? So they're changing the game. It's happening every few months, it seems. So I trust them. They know what they're doing. I will say I would honestly be happy if they could just make it I don't know if Guido and Luigi are listening right now. I'd honestly be happy if all they do in 2026 is make it so that when I take a bone in Rive and put it in a group, so if I Command G on my bone in Rive, it places the anchor point at the base of the bone instead of at the center of the bone, because that just doesn't make any sense. Why would I need it at the center of the bone when I wanted to rotate it from the base of the bone? So if that's the only new feature in 2026, I will be super happy.
All right, so let's talk about the features that Rive added. So Rive added vector feathering this year. Now, normally you'd call that a blur. You can like blur your artwork now. Hey, whoop-de-doo. The reason they didn't have it before, and this is an issue with every other thing out there, like if you're using a Lottie file and and there's a blur or a gradient or something like that, there's a big performance hit with that. And you don't really think about it, but when you have real time and you have complex artwork and it has to run on a little device like a phone or a watch or something, you have to eke all the performance out of it you can. And so the traditional way of blurring things is too slow. So Rive invented a new way. They literally, I think they got a patent on this or something. Oh no, they open sourced it, so they don't have a patent. Somebody over there invented a new blur. It's called vector feathering. There's a whole thing on their website about how it works. But basically, you can have as many things on screen blurred as you want, and it plays back in real time, no lag at all. It's just way faster. It wouldn't surprise me if other tools actually implemented this because it is so fast.
I'm hoping Unreal does, because they don't really have a great system for blurring that. It's not, there's no nodes for it, and the materials, it's complicated to do, and it's there is a node, but it doesn't do it like this. Yeah, this is what
it'd be interesting to see if that technique could work with 3D, because I'm guessing sort of the way you calculate
it's just textural. It's more like textural. Could if you want to have, there's no way to even blur a texture basically in Unreal. You can't have there's no blur node, not a really good one anyway, that does anything of value that I found.
Yeah.
Whereas it takes a lot of work to get that blur going, and it also that hogs resources, right? So I think that even if you could just blur a freaking texture in Unreal easily, you could do a lot, but I would love to be able to have objects that are in front and anything behind it is blurred without having to jump through crazy hoops.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
That would be cool. Yeah. I don't know what's possible, but I think that technology is going to make its way out of Rive too. They've added more options. So they already had responsive layout options. So you can build a Rive file that will work on any size screen, and you set the rules and the layout rules. Now they've added more options, like you can have scrolling behavior. So at this point, if you're designing for a phone, you have to think about what's it going to look like, what happens when the user scrolls down, scrolls up, how does that work? These are things that like linear motion design you don't think about, but once you start thinking about them, you get all these ideas like, oh, it'd be cool. Like I know how, I use an iPhone every day. I know how it works, but wouldn't it be cool because I'm an animator if I did this? And now you can do all that stuff. So I think we're going to see more apps looking like Duolingo because you can now make fully responsive interfaces for them that have animation every time you touch something. And it's really cool and it's on brand and you can build and prototype the whole thing in Rive. Data binding, that was the first giant feature this year. It's kind of a technical thing, but essentially what it lets you do is you can think of it like you're building your artwork, and let's say there's a type layer and there's an image and there's like a colored thing, like some light that changes color. And you don't know what image that's going to be, what the type's going to be, what color that thing's supposed to be. You just know like it's going to be laid out like this, and you preview it and test it. You're going to hand that off to a developer. They're going to change all that for you. And so this is like a very clean, easy way of setting all that up, testing it, making sure it works. You hand it off, and now they can insert whatever image they want and set this thing to any color, and it can be any type, any string. And it's way more involved than that. Like you can do wild things with it. They added a feature called lists, which is basically you can design animations and interactions for like a list of things. Like if you were designing a menu for a website, but you don't know how many things are in the menu. Well, you don't need to know how many. You can like see what it looks like with 10, see what it looks like with 5, and then the developer just says, no, there's actually 30, and it just makes 30 of them. And so there's all these things that are really developer-centered, but they're things that now animators can have a say in that you almost couldn't before because it was just too technical. There was not really a way to do it other than knowing how to code and understanding all of this. And now it's like the gates are open. You have access to all that.
So everything you really need to know about the UI UX space for a motion designer, we package that all up in the UX Animation Essentials course. So definitely take that. But really, it's a huge shift from thinking about creating motion for a viewer who just kind of sits back and passively enjoys a thing to creating motion for a user. And so I'm actually experiencing the motion that you're creating, experiencing the interactions that you're crafting. And so it's that big mental shift that changes how our work manifests into like an actual product in the hands of someone. So if I'm creating something for like a car, like dashboard, I'm not going to create super flashy, fast moving, a bunch of stuff animations while you're driving in the vehicle because that could distract someone and cause an accident. And so that shifts your mind of like, okay, well, maybe if that's the context, maybe things like appear subtly on the screen. Maybe I change only there's like 2 specific types of notifications that will be a little bit more aggressive with their motion or the way that they appear because they're very important, like low gas or low tire pressure. And so that type of just like mental shift helps you problem solve in those things. Also, there's definitely different tools. So as a traditional motion designer, your main tools is like After Effects, maybe Cinema 4D, and some of those like animation specific tools. When you get into the world of UI UX, Figma is like the bare bones fundamental tool that you're going to be working with every single person on a product team. And so you definitely need to know those tools and know how to use them to the best of their abilities. And so there's tools like Figma, which is kind of just foundational, and then tools like ProtoPie, which allow you to actually create a prototype that feels like the real app with interactions and gestures and all those types of things baked into. And there's a lot of other tools like Rive, like Lottie. Just being familiar with some of these tools that are specific to the UI UX space is definitely important. But really at the end of the day, a UX motion designer, a UX designer, a motion designer, an interaction designer, we're all just problem solvers. We're taking problems and we're trying to solve them for the specific context that we're working in and using our tools of motion to solve those problems. And this is all a lot to capture just in this one response. And so definitely check out the UX Animation Essentials course as I dive into all of the different aspects of how it differs from traditional motion graphics, and then how do you actually approach solving these types of problems in the UX context, all the way to how you even actually start searching for jobs in this space.
There's one more big feature, and it launched kind of late, so it's kind of at the end of my list, but I'm going to say it now. They just launched scripting. So the big thing that was missing from Rive versus Flash, Flash had its own language called ActionScript. And you could tie it to anything in your Flash scene. You could make it control the playhead, like jump to frame 3 and then play. And you could do way more complex things. You could have it talk to the website and, pull information from there, and then that shows up in your Flash file. And so this is how companies like 2Advanced made really complicated websites using Flash. You didn't have anything like that in Rive, and now you do. They just added it. and they're using the same language that Roblox uses, which I'd never heard of. It's called Lua. And the reason they picked it is because it's like one of the fastest ones. So you can do everything real time. And they announced it. And within like a couple of weeks of announcing it, all of a sudden, there's all these insane examples of people who've built their own physics systems in Rive and full-blown games. And someone figured out how to port Doom into Rive, and they're running Doom inside of Rive. So now it's kind of nuts what that feature does. And I think the big deal is that now that you can actually code inside of Rive, developers are going to be even more drawn to it. And there's always going to have to be this balance of developers who can like, use Rive and who can like execute, like implement it. However many of them there are, and there's going to be a lot now because of scripting, you're going to need twice as many designers and animators. And so, again, I just feel like this is one of the biggest growth areas for motion design in general. Okay, some other cool things about Rive. Joey Judkins, who is a guest contributor for this episode, launched a studio called We Ride at Dawn that is a Rive-centric studio. And you can listen to him gush about Rive. I think it literally changed his life. But he's been early on it from the beginning, and like opening a studio just for that, I think is really smart because there's not really a lot of those yet. Maybe his is the first one. I don't know. So just like an example of how like if you're willing to get in early and learn these things, like the opportunities are like they're way easier to grab in the early days than they will be in 10 years. There are huge companies using it. So Notion's using Rive for their little AI assistant. Buck actually designed and animated that thing, and it's implemented in Rive. Dropbox used it for their brand guidelines website, which made all the rounds on the web in the web world this year. Netflix, Disney is both using Rive. I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but Netflix has a lot of licenses of Rive, like way more than you would guess. And BMW made an investment in Rive, and so they're tightly connected to that company now, which just shows that Rive is like probably going to be the default thing for car interfaces in the future. I don't know how much 3D they'll need to implement, or if Unreal or Unity can take some of that, but Rive is really the perfect tool for all that stuff. Duolingo's FaceTime feature, which I talked about in Portland in my talk earlier this year. They added a new pricing tier, which is $9 a month. So you can download Rive and use it for free. If you want to actually save out a Rive file and implement it into a website or a product, then you have to have a paid version, and there's a $9 a month version, so it's very cheap. And I don't know, like they're just kind of doing everything right. They have a ton of momentum. We're going to be making more Rive courses next year and talking about all these new fancy features. So, yeah, I'll stop gushing now. But
I mean, look, there was a reason that Flash was as big as it was for so long. I mean, the issue was it didn't, they kind of got killed by the speed issue, and Apple also being like, we're not supporting that, and that suddenly made a very big difference. But there was a need for the ability to design like that. And I just think about this morning, like, I was looking at the one of the things that I chose was Territory, because they did the Off Festival. One of the F's in Off stands for Flash, by the way. Like that was back when
I did not know
launched. It was Flash animation. Yeah. So it was like a Flash festival. Like that was the first one. And so like there's been a need for something like that, but like other tools for animation have kind of like there's different animation tools for like character animation, stuff like that. But yeah, for interfaces, and I think we had a momentary golden age of like really cool stuff, and then the internet needed to get faster, and Apple was like, yeah, well that means we kill Flash. Like even though it wasn't their product, but they're like we're not going to support it, and that's a lot of people. And then Adobe was like, all right,
yeah,
So, but I think that there's a real value in it, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot of cool stuff this coming year.
Yeah. So there's one other kind of Rive-y thing that I'll talk about, which is Lottie Files. So Lottie Files is this cool website where they kind of do a few things. One is they have a great plugin for After Effects that makes it super easy to make Lottie Files. Now you can use body moving. But Lottie Files has some nice features, and you have to have a paid account to use some of them. But for example, it can compress a Lottie file, make it smaller, because Lottie Files, I've said this before, Lottie is a piece of duct tape to hold two things together that were never meant to be together, After Effects and code. And it works, and Lottie Files has continued to surprise me. They've really innovated in that world and come up with a bunch of features that make Lottie Files more useful. You can upload Lottie Files and change the colors in them and change the playback speed and do various things with them, which is kind of cool. they have a giant library of Lottie files, and I think that that's probably their main thing. If you're a developer making something and you just need a cool celebration app, you don't want to hire an animator to do that. You want the stock version of that. So this is like stock Lottie files. So that's cool. But one thing that's interesting that they launched this year is a feature where you can actually create Lottie files with state machines. So the state machine is what Rive has built right into it, where you can have different timelines and you can blend between them, and you can have triggers like if my mouse hovers, go to this one. If I click, go to this one, right? And it's very intricate and smooth, and you can do whatever you want. Lottie Files has figured out, it's kind of a hacky way to do it, but it's clever. And essentially what they've done is they've got this web interface where you can have a Lottie file that has a bunch of different segments to it. Like, okay, let's just say it's a button, right? Well, the button appears from frame 0 to 10, and then the hover state is from 10 to 20, and then the click is from 20 to 30, and then maybe like when the button's inactive, that's from 30 to 40, right? So you've got these states kind of baked into the animation, and then you can use this interface to tell the Lottie file, like, this is what you do when the user hovers, this is what you do when the user clicks. And what it does is it gives you a Lottie file and some code that you can then use in your app or your website. And now your Lottie file kind of is interactive the way a Rive file would be. And the tool itself is actually pretty intuitive. They did a good job with it. The big downside is, once again, you're hacking a Lottie file to do this. And this may sound like a small thing until you actually try it. With Rive, you can blend between timelines instantly, easily. You can have 50 timelines with different things happening on the same object, blend between all of those, depending on what the user's doing. And with a Lottie file, you can't really do that. The Lottie file is...
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing there sounds a lot like the way Flash animation worked when you would have interactions.
Yeah.
It's like, you'd say, if you click on it, then play these 10 frames.
Yes.
If your mouse over it, play these 10, but you couldn't do both. Yeah, totally going to do both at the same time.
Yeah. Now, I think, and I've said this in the past, and I may want to walk it back a little bit. I said, in 10 years, we won't even have Lottie. We won't need it. And I think that is technically true. You don't need it. Rive does everything it does, but just better. But there is the way that I think people underestimate like what it would take to knock After Effects off its pedestal. I'm probably underestimating what it would take to knock Lottie off its pedestal, because there are hundreds of thousands of Lottie files out there. There are way more animators that know After Effects than Rive. And there are plenty of applications where you don't need the interactivity of a Rive file. If you used a Rive file, it would be faster and better, and the file would be smaller, and you'd have more options. So it's objectively better, but maybe you don't need it, and the Lottie file already exists. You can still use Lottie. So I think Lottie files is really, they've really surprised me with like how they've kind of innovated on Lottie as a platform and a format. There's also tools like Lottie Labs, which is like a web native animation tool that's really simple, that spits out Lottie files. I've seen a lot of developers learning that because it's so much easier to learn that than After Effects. It has 1% of the features, but if all you're doing is animating simple lines and stuff, it kind of does everything you need. So I think there's still life in Lottie, which is kind of interesting. I think last year I was a little more skeptical, but now I'm like, maybe they'll coexist, which should have been obvious to me, I think. Yeah. All right, now it's time to talk 3D, and we've got a bunch of 3D stuff to talk about. So I'm gonna let you two lead this. EJ, why don't you kick it off? So Grayscale Gorilla, they merged with Kitbash, and I don't know how much you know about that. So if you want, Aaron and I can take that. But what else besides that do you know about Grayscale from this year?
Well, they came out with their brand new like their asset browser, like separate thing, and they built the connections, like super easy to get assets inside of Blender, because I think before it was really easy to get in Cinema 4D, but nothing else. And I believe it's Blender and Unreal they build a connection to as well. They Substance Painter too, which is really nice. They had a lot more models and assets and stuff too. But yeah, the Kitbash thing was the real big surprise there, which I think makes complete sense. Like, I don't know, you guys are more the business side of things, but like I know one of the things that GSG wanted to do was expand more in the Blender and Unreal areas, and I think it was probably difficult for them to just build off of the Cinema 4D audience. So I think this solves a huge issue for them, because I'm sure Kitbash has a way bigger audience of Blender users and Unreal users.
Yeah. I think look, there's something to like, I like think that it's in terms of like reaching those people with that kind of thing, it's good, but aesthetically they're very different companies. So I'm really curious to see how that works out. GSG has always had impeccable aesthetics with, you know, very high-end design, and you know, sometimes you'd even open it and think you were looking at a catalog for like real furniture and things like that. And obviously, I mean, I already have a subscription to Kitbash 3D, and I'm using stuff all the time because I'm a big sci-fi nerd, you know, who loves that stuff, and it's very not Grayscale Gorillas. So like, I think that was actually a big thing keeping them necessarily from getting into Unreal and getting into Blender, is that the kind of stuff that they do in Cinema 4D, that's not the kind of stuff being done in those other applications. So this could be very interesting. You know, I'm curious to see, you know, the adoption that happens with Grayscale Gorilla's content into those places. But we did already see one move from them, which was that they used, you know, Kitbash got a much better. This was where Kitbash benefits more than anybody of the two. Is their Cinema 4D importer now imports things as like, you know, like much better than it did before. So it's like that's where Grayscale Gorilla has always had its strength. They have their plugins in C4D. Actually, I think their plugins, some of them are really, really great for C4D. And they're one of the few people that have survived the C4D plugin market, which I'm going to talk about in a second, because, you know, we get to that question of what Maxon's future is looking like. I'm like, the reason I'm even thinking about Blender is because when I want to do something in Cinema 4D that's hard, I got to do it the hard way. There's no other solution. But when I want to do something that's hard, I can go to the Blender market. I'm looking at it. Someone's like, oh, I wish I had that in Unreal, or I wish I had that in Cinema 4D. So, like, I think that you know, if we're make that transition from GSG over to Maxon, we can start talking a little bit about like I said, GSG is pretty much the only the real plugin company to have survived that change to R21 that broke so many other plugins, and that the developers said, screw it, I'm out, you know?
Yeah, let's talk about Maxon. This is the one. So, you know, we talked a little bit about this with Adobe, that, you know, like there's always someone gunning for Adobe, and there's always like, you could find posts on the internet of people saying, RIP Adobe, look, Affinity's free and stuff like this. And, you know, when you really look at it, you're like, okay, Adobe's fine. They're still growing. They're going to be around. I mean, I can't imagine a world without them. Like they're just everywhere. And I love the tools, and, you know, Maxon. And I want to just kind of preface this with like, this is the kind of stuff I like, I really want to try, at least for me, to be like objective about. I never like, you know, there's a lot of negativity on the internet, and I'll point it out. I'll comment on it. I don't want to jump in and be negative. This year, something feels different about the way people talk about Maxon to me. And I think that's because there really is a viable alternative. But I'm curious, why don't I just leave it there? What do you guys think about what's been going on with Cinema 4D in the motion design space?
You can go, Aaron. I'll follow you.
Listen, we do this all day. What I would say is, I don't like the sentiment doesn't mean anything to me. What I look at is really like, how are they performing in stocks? I hate to say it, but like the company is not suffering that way. So like they may be losing a lot of the more independent artists. Big companies are still absolutely using it. But that doesn't mean there isn't room now. That hasn't left a lot of room for Blender to come in and do some stuff. I just think that like Cinema 4D, Maxon as a company, you know, it seems like their priority has shifted to much more of a bigger company, that they want to service these bigger companies and aren't necessarily as worried about the indie designer. But I don't. But like their numbers don't show anything bad happening. In other words, that like when their stocks come out, because they're a publicly traded company, which most of the companies we talk about outside of Adobe are not, you know, you don't know what's going on with them. You have no idea like how they're performing. You don't know what their numbers are. But with Maxon, their numbers just get better every single year. It's just how they, you know, how they roll. And so like people can complain about it all they want, but like at the end of the day, as long as Maxon is still making money and successful, the products are going to continue to exist, and they're going to keep doing whatever it is that they're doing, right? So yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they do tend to put some of their own like developers out of business by like, for example, they haven't done it yet, but they've obviously invested heavily in simulations, and that is directly going to affect. Why am I drawing a blank on the name, EJ, of the
yeah.
Insidious.
Yeah,
Insidious.
Insidium, right? It's absolutely hitting Insidium. People, because they asked the question, why do I need Insidium when it was pretty obvious before? Now it's more like they have to get into that stuff, discover how freaking hard it is to do, and then see that, oh, there's a solution out there that is more focused and better at it. But like, Adobe has done similar things in the past too, getting, Lumetri Color, Red Giant had Magic Bullet and stuff. They would often teach people that the thing is important and then teach them that they should be disappointed and find a better solution, right? Yeah. So, Maxon, I mean, their stuff is like, if you're just trying to do basic stuff, right, EJ, you can definitely talk to this more than I can, but for fluid simulations, for particle simulations, like you could get started and get a lot out of Cinema 4D alone. It's just that when you want to start doing more niche and heavy duty stuff, like the tools are not there yet. So, but I don't know how long. I don't know if they're planning to develop them further or if they're just kind of checking off a bullet pointed list of like, hey, we don't have this kind of thing. Let's get it in there, and if that's good enough, we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the perception thing, the social media perception, Joey, that I think you kind of allude to, and I think it's the same thing about the AI where there's people using it, but people aren't really talking about it. And I also think about like just most of the people that are using Cinema 4D, they're older and they just are not on social media as much anymore. They don't have the time for it. They got kids, they got other response. It's just not, they just get burnt out on it. So, the more I talk to actual people that work at studios and stuff, like people are still using Cinema 4D. I just think it's not
absolutely
as someone who posts about Cinema 4D all the time, like I get no engagement on it at all. So I think most people just give up because there's just you're not getting the numbers that you used to see when you post a Cinema 4D tutorial anymore. That's why there's maybe a handful of Cinema 4D tutorial people that are consistent out there doing it and they don't get any views. But the moment you put the word Blender in a tweet, like I have the most engagement I've ever had in my social media life because I retweeted someone, Ducky 3D, and said, hey, actually, people that are poo-pooing the new array tools in Blender, I think it's actually a really big deal because yes, you were able to do this before, but now it's way easier. And I think it's important for software to get out of the way of the artists and just let them do their thing. I got like 2,000 likes on it or something, which is the most I've ever gotten. So it's just the thing where if you see that as like an influencer or something, guess what you're going to pick up? And so that's why I think the social media thing is totally detached from reality of what's actually happening in studios, what's happening for freelancers. I get a lot of messages like almost like once a week at least. Like I get the question of like, should I move to Blender? Da 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 da. And I'm always like, well, why? And they can never tell me why. It's always they feel the FOMO, like they feel the FUD, and it's like, well, are you getting jobs? Like, yeah. I was like, okay, well then just keep doing what you're doing. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. So that's by the way, you talk about that. Like the thing is, when I look at Blender, I look at it not as something I would use because my job requires it, but more like there's some things I want to do in my personal work that I just cannot do. Like that there's great. Yeah, there's like so much great tools for that. But the truth is, like, we spend time at CBS or wherever. We know that they're all using Cinema 4D. Maybe there's one guy using Blender right now, but I do think that this might be like we're going to see a shift. More people are who have started out and were using it as like a younger person are now using it, and I think it is definitely becoming more acceptable as a tool in professional spaces.
And I just think it's been and I'm just trying to think the previous years, but I think even last year was very. Like the updates have been not very newsy or headliney. Like liquids were the big thing this year, which I think that's a big deal. Like I think they're very well designed. They're very easy to use. And when Maxon first came out, when they announced they were redoing their simulation system, I was like, if they can get 80% of the quality of Houdini with like 10% of the complexity, I think they'll nail it. And I think they have nailed it. But with a lot of these things, it's almost like they come out with a feature like UV unwrapping, they update it, and then there's a lot of issues and shortcomings with it, and they're just like, it's done. We're done with that. Or like sculpting, like, well, now we got ZBrush, so we're not going to do anything to the sculpting inside of Cinema 4D. But it's like, but do I really want to learn ZBrush to just do some basic stuff when I just want to stay inside of Cinema? And that's the thing that, like, I think would attract anyone to Blender, is because their sculpting is really great. Their grease pencil is really great. They have, like, basically, there's a plugin for a thing that can replicate a decent amount of, like, an okay amount of what Substance Painter can do. So it's kind of becoming a one-stop shop for things. And I think for anyone who uses After Effects or anything like that, is like, you don't want to learn, you want to keep everything inside of After Effects. Because the moment you have to learn something else, especially for something niche, like, you don't want to do it. So I think that's
recently I worked with a hard surface modeler, and like I was looking for different ones. They're all using Blender, actually. Like all the ones that I wanted to work with were using Blender, and I thought that was interesting because like it hasn't maybe necessarily reached other places in our space, but it's a free tool that does modeling and it does it really well. Like, why wouldn't you use it?
Yeah, there's specific things that, like, for simulations, for example, like even the Blender guru dude will say that, Blender's simulations they stink. Like, they're not good. They're not stable. So I think there are a lot of things that you just can't, it would be so hard to do. Like, for example, there's no spline wrap in Blender. Or if there is, like, it's very hard to do. So I think, and this is one of the things that I keep saying, is that Cinema 4D is still the easiest way to learn 3D, like, hands down. It's the easiest way to get into 3D, and I'll tell that to anyone. But I think where they're losing the thread is that used to be their, like, big marketing push, is like, look how easy all this stuff is. You can make all this cool stuff super easy. Look at this cloner. Look at this dynamics. It all falls. Look at how great this looks. And Grayscale Gorilla were the people that were like, yeah, and then look at how beautiful you can get this to look with these materials and these and the lighting setups and stuff like that, and like really good product rendering. And I feel like there's, like, I personally don't know. And like, I talk to people at Maxon all the time, and I'm like, I just don't know where the direction is. Like, I see where Blender's going in some ways. Like, I see what its strengths are, and they're continuing to develop that way. I know what Cinema 4D's strengths are. I just don't see them continuing on. Like, when's the last very useful deformer that has came out? Like, there's all the, like, normal smoothing and stuff that's super cool in Blender that, if you're unfamiliar, it's like you can have two separate pieces of geometry and put one on top of a surface of another, and blending the normals, you basically just combine those two objects together without, like, any Boolean operations. So there's a lot of innovative things that they could be doing that I'm really not seeing. So, like, I mentioned liquids. Liquids, every app has liquids. So, okay, they finally came on par with that. UDIM support. Holy Lord. Like, they were the only app, like the only major app that didn't have that. And now they finally do. So it's like, okay, well, you're just adding these things that, all these other major apps have had. And there's nothing like I said, there's no big new shiny feature that is hyping people up about. Like, liquids was that for a while, but there hasn't been anything since. And I think that's where they are really struggling, where, okay, they might say, like, well, we're fixing a lot of bugs, but it's like, okay, well, so is Blender. And they're also innovating and adding all these really cool, shiny tools. Oh, by the way, there's also, like Aaron mentioned, there's all these add-ons that, like, literally every Motion Mondays, there's at least one, like, incredible Blender add-on where I'm like, oh, man, I wish they had this for Cinema 4D. So I think they're losing in the social media war. And, I know they just hired a new head of marketing, so it remains to be seen, like, what their new direction is there. But I know they're really big in this ArchViz stuff, which I guess makes sense in some way, but they're kind of expanding in these other markets, and they're kind of losing in the MoGraph kind of market, I feel like.
So yeah, they're losing, that battle maybe on social media, but they're still, like, it's just perception, and I think that they've got a long time before they're going anywhere or anything like that. Like, Cinema 4D is still really strong. I just think that they have, in a way, opened up for more professionals to start using to use Blender, but I don't think it's going to affect them and make the software disappear in any meaningful way.
I think one of their biggest problems right now is, even if they maintain their current audience, which I don't think they are not. I would love to know what the new user, for younger people getting out of college or in college, I would say they're massively losing to that younger age bracket that are, first time 3D artists, just because people aren't going to put down the money to play with Cinema 4D. And, like I said, I think Cinema 4D is the easiest way to learn 3D, but if it's expensive, they'll never know.
Yeah. Yeah. What I would say is I think Aaron's exactly right that it's hard to always draw a line from the social media sentiments you're seeing to the actual performance of the company. And from what we're hearing, Maxon's doing awesome. But the reason that I even brought this up, because what feels different to me is that there's a contingent of people, and if you're on X for long enough, you'll know who they are, who just complain about everything, right? And YouTube comments probably a quarter of them are negative if you bring up Maxon or Adobe or anything like that, right? And I tend to discount those. What felt different to me this time was just artists who have been on the C4D train for almost 20 years, have made their whole career on it, done some of the best work, and these are very high level respected artists, starting to say things publicly about not just I'm thinking of switching to Blender, but saying negative things about Maxon. And I think, EJ, you covered it really well. I think that there was a culture at Maxon of really communicating with our tribe. That's maybe that's just an artifact of being a smaller company back then. I know when Paul Babb left the company, he was really tied into our community, so I'm sure that was part of it too. If anyone from Maxon is listening to this, I also agree with EJ that C4D is by far the easiest entry point into 3D. It's not even close. Mm-hmm. And I would love to, I would love it. I know I don't have a say in this, but I would love it if there was some innovation on really trying to get that younger audience. How do you get young 3D artists to use this instead of Blender? Because you got to play the long game, right? I mean, a lot of apps have a free version that's just kind of handicapped, right? And you have Cinema 4D Lite, but that's very handicapped. But I mean, only render out at 720p, right? Or you can't use the simulation tool. Just something where you can use the MoGraph tools. You can learn how field and the vector systems work. You can use the cloners and the modeling tools and all those things. And maybe I don't know. Maybe you need Redshift. Maybe you don't. But I think there's a way to fix this. I would love to see that because I've tried learning Blender. I don't think it's that hard to learn when you have a good teacher. I think Elijah has made an amazing course. But there are things that you can do so fast in C4D that you, as of now, can't. Now, before we talk about Blender, there is a very interesting curveball that Maxon threw this year, which was acquiring Autograph. And Aaron, I know you've got some thoughts on this. So first off, what is Autograph for anyone who doesn't know? And then what do you think?
So there was a company called Left Angle. They make a product called Autograph, which is essentially it's an After Effects competitor if it could compete, and it couldn't because for a lot of reasons they didn't have they had no marketing money to put that product out there, and it still it lacked a lot of features that you would find in After Effects that are really important for motion design or compositing. And so, but what I will say is because I used it, I tried it. And I was like, this is fast. Yeah. This is does not whatever it is, it's new architecture that isn't built on old stuff. And it is completely, it's completely new and, just a few years old. And it's got way, way faster. Now, the thing is that Maxon bought it. And, what I would say is it's an interesting buy because Maxon is the current owner of some of the most staples, the most important plugins for the motion design and After Effects space. And right now they're in After Effects, which is a company that Maxon doesn't own and has no control over. And by buying this thing, they could put their products into this thing as a default, right? If you buy Maxon 1, you get all this stuff in there. that would instantly make it usable in a way that the software isn't already. They have a high-end compositor, right? So they've got their Super Comp, which is like it's like that was hard to get people to adopt, but it is a really good compositor for After Effects, and it would be great here. Basically, makes layers aware of other layers so that glows behind it affect layers in front of it, which is something you can't normally do, but you can do in more complex node-based compositors. And they've got all the Trapcode stuff and the Magic Bullet stuff and the Universe stuff. It's like there's just like a huge bounty of very powerful tools that run slower in After Effects because After Effects is slower, that will run faster here. And just by the nature of having this included in an After Effects competitor that comes out and instantly has all this stuff, that is actually huge, right? Is it going to happen? I mean, they bought it, and I know that, like, listen, from what I understand from Autograph, like they did not Left Angle, they didn't have money to market it, so they built the product, and it kind of just sat there. I imagine that Maxon did not have to invest heavily in buying that. Like, It probably was an easy buy. Bought it for essentially a song. That number is not public, and I don't know it, but just from like knowing where they were and the situation they were in, like a great product with nowhere to market it and use it and sell it and whatnot. Suddenly, a big company like Maxon, same way they bought ZBrush, right? It makes sense. It makes sense for them to have that because it's the one thing they bought this company, Red Giant, which I used to work for. And sure, we sat in the same space kind of, but like they had all these tools that they were still reliant on another company. And so now that's not the case. I think that they've been quiet, but I really feel like this year we're going to see something. That's based entirely on speculation. I've not heard from anyone at Max on this, but like it's been sitting there quietly for quite a while now, and they don't buy things to crush them. They buy things to build on them.
Yeah, and from what I remember, because I downloaded it when it came out, I played around with it, I had the same reaction as you. It's like everything's real time. I assume it probably leverages GPUs way more. I know that like the After Effects rendering engine that actually like puts pixels together and composites things and what you see in the comp viewer, that's old. They've been updating it, but like it's built on a very old architecture. And Autograph was new. Autograph also had a full 3D system in it. So you could bring in 3D models and it had lights and it had all that. And now After Effects has added 3D, right? So I could see from Maxon's point of view, one of our primary products is like living in the Adobe ecosystem, and Adobe is starting to not really encroach, but like, in a way, like they're adding 3D. So I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's very interesting. And the only way a real After Effects competitor emerges, and even if this is what happens with Autograph, it will take 10 years, right, to really make a difference. But you're going to have very deep pockets. And Maxon's one of the few companies that has deep pockets, right? Not they're not nearly the size of Adobe.
Not
but
Adobe deep.
Not Adobe, yeah, not infinite, but relative to Cavalry, for example. Or even Rive, right, which has investors and they've raised millions of dollars. They can't compete with Adobe on the marketing and the community. They can't do that.
I mean, the other thing about it is if you want to use Cinema 4D for compositing, right? Like the whole process to do that in After Effects right now is either you render it out with everything, or you try using Maxon's. It's janky. Yeah. It's not good. But if they have a system that makes it easy to take motion design, motion graphics, or other stuff, there, visual effects stuff, and you want to composite it, and it's easy to do. Like that would really help people. Like they're already paying for Cinema 4D and have this stuff, and it's all part of Maxon One. They'd give it a shot. I don't know if it would take. It definitely wouldn't take the way that After Effects has, but in a couple of years, it could.
Yeah, there's another tool out there called HitFilm that almost no one's heard of. That is very similar to Autograph. Real-time everything, full 3D system. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. I don't know do the Red Giant's plugins work with HitFilm?
No, it uses I forget what kind of architecture it has, but it's a different one. There are
plugins that exist on both, on After Effects and HitFilm, but for some reason it's almost like Sony Vegas, like it just never caught on with pros.
So I remember. So originally they long ago they made plugins for After Effects that were pretty cool, and they decided they were like, why don't we just make our own thing? They made a free version, and the adoption for the free version was very high, but the transition from free into paid was almost non-existent.
It's brutal. Yeah, that's a brutal business.
Yeah,
model.
It's brutal. But it's not like the tools aren't bad, but again, like nobody professional was using HitFilm, so like that's very hard to get people to buy it when they can't get work using it. You know?
Yeah.
So if you were like doing a lot of people were who were doing visual effect shots, the kind of stuff that Andrew Kramer would do on his thing, like you could do that in HitFilm really easily, and people loved that. But to take it beyond that professionally was not really possible.
Well, speaking of brutal business models, how about we don't charge anything for the product? Let's talk about Blender. And Blender fascinates me. I know that they had a big leadership change announced this year. The head of the Blender organization is stepping down. This sort of beloved guy who's been running it for years and has kind of shepherded it into what it is now. And when they made that announcement, it was at the Blender conference, and I think they showed this slide of how much money the Blender Foundation brings in donations and sponsorships and stuff like that, and it's like a few $1 million. It's not a lot. So it boggles my mind how they're able to develop it so fast and have so many releases and add all these features. And then this year they launched Blender 5.0, which is a big deal. So, EJ, I know you've been following Blender pretty darn closely last couple of years and working with Elijah on his course and his next course. So what's your current take on Blender? How's it doing?
So one of the things that I've been saying for years is that, and it's a reoccurring theme with a lot of people that try to pick up Blender, is there's so many stories of people trying it and just not getting it and just bailing, and then trying again and just bailing. And, one of the issues was that they're slowly fixing is just their UI UX. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's slowly getting better. And one of the things that, I keep saying about Cinema 4D is they've nailed the UI UX. It's super easy to use. They got the cloner stuff, the MoGraph stuff. I said once Blender figures out the UI UX and it figures out how to do some cloner MoGraph stuff, like it's going to be rough sledding for Cinema 4D. And the first shots were fired at the whole MoGraph stuff with the new array tool, which looks pretty impressive. So basically what it does is they're presets for the geometry node system, which geometry nodes can do a lot of stuff, a lot of procedural modeling, generation, all that kind of stuff. But to do something as simple as like, let me clone something radially used to take like a whole bunch of nodes. Now it's a preset. You add the array object, you define the object, and you just do it. There's randomization built in. Now, the one big downside is there's no effectors or anything like that. So like once you do it, you just clone the stuff and you kind of scatter things on a surface so that you can clone on a surface. You can affect things with like, weight painting and stuff like that, which is really cool. There's a sweep there's basically their version of a sweep object, which, you create a spline, you define the profile shape, and it creates a little sweep object. Now that is also something that used to be a huge pain in the butt. So they're slowly making these very basic things to do in Cinema 4D, also very basic to do in Blender. Now there's still a lot of things that like I said before, align to spline, stuff like that is just impossible or very, very difficult to do in Blender. But like I said, they're really, I think maybe Blender's getting to the point where they're seeing like where this big opportunity is for them. They added a new asset shelf with the compositor as well. So not only are they building presets for geometry nodes, but they're also doing it for their compositor. So now you have presets like chromatic aberration and vignettes. And so there's all these kind of like really cool post effects that you can now do that, again, used to take a lot of different nodes. And there's some Grease Pencil stuff. So Grease Pencil now supports motion blur. There's ACES compatibility. That was a big deal because before I feel it wasn't able to fit in those pipelines before. The Grease Pencil has a new pen tool in the edit mode, which it allows it to function a lot more like Illustrator paths, where you can kind of change the, do you want a pointy point, or do you want it to be rounded, or Bezier paths. And before, when you drew a Grease Pencil path, it was very kind of like you use the pen tool in Illustrator, would have a lot of extra points and stuff like that. Now you can easily clean that up into like a nice curve with your Bezier handles and stuff like that. There's updated Geometry Nodes UI. There is a storyboarding template, so you can actually storyboard within Blender, which is super cool. There's new sculpting brushes and stuff like that. And of course, like all the add-ons that have come out in the last year, like there's a new retopology tool that looks pretty promising that uses AI. There's Pencil Pro, there's Clado that's gotten like a lot of updates too. So these are the things that is like, you know, if Blender had, or if Cinema 4D had these, they'd be doing really good. Another one of those is just the, the add-ons. And there's also a thing they just launched called Blender Labs, where it's basically like they have all these projects that were like, hey, let's all work on these projects together. And so you can contribute if you want, and you can kind of get a sneak peek at all the tools that are in development as they're kind of building it.
Hello, my name is Elijah Sheffield. I'm a professional 3D motion designer, and I educate the masses on YouTube, teaching them to use Blender as a professionally 3D viable tool. Blender has added a lot this year. There's some really cool features and some cool things to be really excited about. The first of which is them kind of leaning more into their Grease Pencil tool. Now, Grease Pencil is kind of a unique tool, just in a bit of a league of its own, but they've started adding more functionality to it. Recently with Blender 5.0, they added motion blur, which I don't really care about. I'm not really sure who is super excited about motion blur in Grease Pencils, but they did add in a pen tool, which is one of those things that feels like it should have already been there, but we're just happy we got it now. So they are kind of leaning into that a little bit more and adding more tools. At the top of the year, I believe it was still in 2025, they also added geometry node support for Grease Pencil, which was really cool. So you can get like the clay pencil stuff and look into that. But some really interesting things there. Another thing that they've added that I think is a huge get for more of the casual users or people who are not as node minded is bringing some of those basic geometry node functions into the modifiers panel. So with the modifiers being the very accessible things you can just slap on objects and curves, now you can do things like they fixed the array, so you can make it array in a circle now. That's something that should already be there, but okay, fine. Now we have it in a tidier package and don't have to turn to geometry nodes or make some complicated setup to get around it. We also have stuff like scatter on point, curves to tube, stuff like that, where it's things that you would typically turn to geometry nodes to make, and it's not that complicated of a setup, but it's certainly more complicated than just clicking, scatter on point. So that's a huge thing as well. And the last thing I'll say, I think the addition of Blender Lab, the launch of Blender Lab, is a really big deal. Now, I don't really fully understand it, so I'm not going to speak from a position of authority. I'm just going to give you my layman's take on it. But essentially, they are kind of outsourcing the pioneering to some degree to people that are like dedicated in this space. So it's not really even the core fundamental development team for the Blender Foundation. I believe they're going to outside people, maybe peripherally adjacent people, to do bigger projects that the Blender Foundation used to kind of focus on there. And they're looking to these outside sources, these outside studios, to produce little short films or projects that are pioneering new tools and using Blender in new and exciting ways. So kind of the ingenuity of Blender is kind of now being outsourced to the masses, which I think is going to be a really cool thing. They can focus now more on making a really solid product, rolling out more LTS versions where they're really stable and studio stable, and then this Blender Lab can kind of handle more of the experimental features and the new pioneering in 3D. So I think that's a really good omen for how things are shaking out as Blender becomes more ubiquitous. But that's just, and maybe that's a nerd thing, but that excites me a lot. So I'm in a really unique position where I did a course for School of Motion, but it is not a course of just like, here's your basics of Blender, here's how you kind of scooch into the Blender space. It's more targeted at people who are like me. They're coming from Cinema 4D, they're coming from Maya, from ZBrush, things that have some familiarity and have some things in common. Obviously, they're a 3D DCC, but they're still quite different. They're still quite unique in their own way. And so that course kind of ushers people from those other packages into Blender and kind of gives them a jump starter kit from the perspective of, I'm not talking down to you, you're already a 3D artist, but now you're going to learn some new tools and some new nomenclature. So coming from that perspective, obviously I've interacted with quite a few people who are kind of coming from Cinema, coming from Maya. I've had some really exciting and big names kind of reach out to me and want to talk to me, or let me know that they took the course and they were, really excited about it. So, that is kind of an interesting thing to see, that more and more studios, more freelancers, more like little, pop-up shops, all of them are, not all of them, but a lot of them are starting to look at Blender as a more viable tool, if not something worth being curious about. So if studios are not switching to Blender, they're certainly starting to incorporate it more. And I've seen a large shift of people being like, okay, there's something here. And honestly, the Blender price tag is quite alluring. So you have a lot of freelancers and a lot of really small studios that are like, if we can pull this off, and our overhead is zero for the software package on the 3D front, that's pretty enticing. So Cinema is still king in the motion design space. Its integration with After Effects is amazing. That's like one of the biggest things. Recently, they added a new liquid simulation tool or function, and that seemed really great. I wish Blender's liquid sims were a little bit better, and certainly wouldn't mind having the stuff from Cinema. And Cinema also has really great tools for motion design when it comes to type. Blender's type is not really there. I've talked about this a little bit in some periphery, but to get good type animation or dynamic type animation in Blender, it's either a little bit of a pain or it takes a little bit of setup. So getting something like that would be really awesome. But from what I'm seeing, I think that perhaps Blender might be taking a little bit of a step, maybe even just an inch, but even a step closer to kind of that more MoGraphy space. A couple of features that I'd like to see added into Blender in upcoming releases. I would love to see a little bit more UI customization. Now, you can already change your windows and kind of change the configuration of your screen, but I would really love to see a little bit more button customization, a little bit more getting inside and fine-tuning some of the details. I think that could be a really great feature, especially for developers and people who want to make a little bit more earth-shattering tools other than just hitting in to open the side panel to access your stuff. So hopefully they will upgrade that a little bit and give us a little bit more customization there. Now, another thing that I think could be really interesting within Blender would be a more competitive and a little bit more robust set of texture painting. Right now, if you want to do texture painting and you're really serious about it, the kind of ubiquitous software would be Substance Painter. It's really good. It's really simple. It's very intuitive to use, and it has a lot of really great common sense tools in there. And obviously it can. It's a standalone package, so it can do what it does really, really well. But Blender is kind of unique in a way that it has a little bit of everything. And I think they're starting to get a lot better with the sculpting. I think the sculpting tools are really good. I think the UVing tools are starting to get really good. So what I would like to see from Blender is that they actually put a little bit more time into the texture painting thing, and or the texture painting feature, and maybe they spend a little bit more time developing that so that it feels and works a little bit more like Substance. You don't even have to have all the right tools. You don't have to have the new pen tool. You don't have to have, all the things that are included in that. But it would be great to see a little bit more functionality and for it to work a little bit more smooth and a little bit more like Substance Painter, something that just feels really good to use.
This is something I will credit Maxon for doing. And I don't know if it's because I complained enough behind the scenes with them about it. But one of the things I told them, I was like, I do Motion Mondays. We do Motion Mondays. And there's always these previews, whether it's Adobe's teasing a new beta feature for After Effects or Photoshop or whatever it is. Like, they're teasing it before it actually comes out. And I think that's helpful in the development process, just to get that reaction, get it tested, get it in people's hands, and make that product the best that it can be. And I was saying that, why doesn't Maxon do this at all? You only hear about the feature once it's out, and then there's very limited information about it sometimes, and you don't know how to use it, or maybe there's a really cool feature, but it's not talked about, and then it's up to us to kind of hype it. And that's one thing they started doing. I think the first time they actually did this was with ZBrush for iPad, and they had an event, and they made a big deal about it. And I think it actually worked. It built a lot of hype around the ZBrush for iPad, and even the ZBrush stuff that they're doing now. They got a new UVs, and we'll talk a little bit more about ZBrush later, but that's the one thing that I think if Maxon leads into a little bit more, they'll do well to do. But anyways, going back to Blender, and I talked about ZBrush for iPad, I think the biggest news for not only 2025 but 2026 is they announced that Blender is coming to iPad, which I think is a massive deal, because one of the biggest issues with ZBrush was the UI was difficult and really hard to learn. But the moment they ported everything over to iPad, they kind of had a fresh slate to let's think about how can we redesign this for the UI UX experience, plus all the the Apple Touch experience and stylus and all that stuff. And so Blender has this opportunity as well to kind of rethink how they could redesign their UI to be more more responsive to that mobile workflow and the stylus and everything like that. And the thing that, like, if Cinema 4D ever tried to do this, I couldn't tell you what would translate to the iPad. Like Blender, I can immediately think like Grease Pencil, that would be awesome. Like you're basically drawing in 3D space, like Feather 3D. And then their sculpting, like their sculpting tools are actually really, really good. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there, not only with, because I think they teased like they're going to, some of the first things they're going to port over is the sculpting and then the Grease Pencil, and then the UI was going to be kind of updated too. So it's going to be really interesting what happens there with the UI UX. Does some of the things they do with the UI UX translate to the desktop? Like ZBrush. ZBrush is doing that now too. They just had a big announcement that they're updating their UI, like refreshing it completely, which I think people have been waiting for 15 years to do. So yeah, a lot of, and this is the problem, is like Blender has all this news coming, and yeah, not so much on the Maxon side.
I do think that with Maxon, something you have to keep in mind is that each of the teams that make the product, so like, you have the ZBrush team, it's a different culture they came in with, and for a little while they certainly they'll hold on to that. So like wanting to share that stuff ahead of time, like it's not maybe like the normal way that Maxon would do things, but I think a lot of the companies operate on the worry that if they announce something and then they don't release it in time, then people get angry. Like the exact opposite approach of Andrew Kramer, completely, right? But yeah, but like because I know the Red Giant, we were always afraid of doing it because like if it took even a month longer, we were afraid people would be so pissed about it. But the truth is that like the way things work now is teasing is just a really big part of this process. So I think there's older thinking there with some other people who like culturally are like, hey, we always share, so they're doing it. Because like you pointed out, that the really big instances of Maxon sort of sharing ahead have been with ZBrush. I don't know if I've seen it as much elsewhere, maybe a couple of places with Cinema 4D, but not too much.
I mean, the news cycle is 24 hours long now, so you have to always have something to talk about,
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing, I'm curious, EJ, what you think about this. Like with Blender, the reason that when I was like, okay, I'm going to learn 3D, C4D was kind of the obvious choice, but people were still using 3ds Max and Maya and things like that. And those tools, I dipped my toe into them and was like, whoa, scared off, and went into C4D. And I think what C4D has done so well, which is a really deliberate kind of design philosophy that you have to have if you're making software, which is they've taken all of this complexity, like what's happening inside of a cloner when you're moving an effector through it. That's a very complex mathematical thing happening, and they totally abstract it away. Where, you've got your options on the effector, and it's gotten more, intricate over the years, and you can stack effectors, and this one's add, this one's subtract. You can do a lot of stuff like that. But it abstracts all that complexity away. And so not only do you not have to know, you don't have to know how to build it from scratch, but also you don't even have to think about it because you can't, right? Like you can go into Espresso, and I know that there's that whole, I forget what it's called in C4D, it's like geometry nodes, but it like the object nodes or whatever. Scene nodes, yeah. In C4D that I don't think a ton of people use, but you don't need any of that, right?
No.
In Blender, it sounds like what they've done, because they started with geometry nodes, which essentially that's the way Houdini works. Like it's completely procedural, and if you want vertexes to do a specific thing, you need to like point them in the right direction and do it kind of manually. And now they're making presets that make that easier, but it doesn't really truly abstract away all the complexity underneath. And I wonder if really that's the thing that needs to happen. Because C4D artists are used to not having to think about what is going on under the hood, right? And even if I wanted to change it, I can't sometimes, right? You just can't by design. but you figure out how to work around that and make amazing stuff, and it's easier cognitively. And that was my impression of Blender, was like when I started learning it, things that in C4D, you take two splines, you combine them, subtract this one from this one, and then you extrude it, and then you bend it. Like it's just so, it just works in a more natural way. Whereas Blender, you have to really understand, kind of like I imagine Houdini works, where no, I need to understand what each step is actually doing and use the thing that does that. Does that ring true to you at all, that like Blender is just right now, it's just kind of more complicated because of that? They're exposing everything to you, and there's advantages, but there's actually big disadvantages too.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because what Maxon's doing with the scene nodes is like going the backwards direction. Like they're trying to make things more like geometry nodes and trying to market towards that crowd that I think they already lost to Houdini anyway. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not quite sure what Maxon's doing with the scene nodes, because they already did the hard part. Now they're not doing anything and expanding on that. But now you have Blender kind of going the other route, where they've built this like really successful, powerful geometry node setup that can do a lot of things, but it's not easy and it takes a lot of steps.
Right.
And so, I remember when they announced the array stuff, the Blender Guru guy was like, I can pretty much shorten my whole donut tutorial series by like 2 hours, because like that's how long it took to teach. Like, okay, well, if I need to teach this cloner thing, I have to teach geometry nodes like way early. And like now he says that he doesn't even have to really introduce geometry nodes at all, which is like removes a huge complexity to learning a 3D software. So that's what I'm saying, where it's like they're slowly, adding the ease of use back in there. But
That's awesome.
As someone who knows Cinema 4D a ton, and like with Elijah, building that that Blender course, there's a lot of things where it's like, I think I just know too much, because there's things and certain quirks and weird workarounds, and sometimes you just can't even do the things in Blender that like is 2 button clicks in Cinema. So like there's a lot of friction for someone like me, and I'm sure there's friction for a lot of artists coming from some other 3D apps that want to get into Blender. But of course, like if you're doing modeling and you're doing very specific aspects of the 3D workflow, yeah, I think Blender makes a lot of sense. Like if you do characters and you're doing modeling, you're doing sculpting and you're texturing, you want to do the grease pencil stuff, it makes a lot of sense. But if this doesn't mean that if you're doing a lot of MoGraphy stuff and dynamics in Cinema 4D, you're not like this array stuff. It's a great first step, but it's nowhere near gonna. I don't even know how long it's gonna take for them to basically recreate that awesome functionality that they've done in Cinema 4D with the MoGraph stuff, because that stuff's had a 12-year head start, and this is just the first iteration. So it's like I said, it's a good first step. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think this makes Blender a lot more appealing to artists, beginning 3D artists. But I think there's still a massive opportunity for Maxon to, do some
grab the
counter
grab the
programming.
youth.
Yeah.
Get the Utes.
Yeah.
The
Get
Utes.
the youth.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about Houdini briefly. We don't teach any Houdini stuff yet. We invited Urban Bradesco, who runs Jumpstart Academy. They teach like really high-end visual effects. I think before he started that company, he was known as the Explosions guy. I think that's actually like his handle on social media. So this guy knows like intricately like how Houdini simulations and all the really complex stuff where you are typing code and all that. He knows how that works. And what he said was actually interesting, because a couple of years ago I talked to him, and the first time I met him, and he was really kind of nervous about AI and what it would mean for visual effects and explosions and stuff like that. And to me, that actually made sense, because like you can train an AI model on explosions and it can probably get pretty close, and then you can just click where you want it makes sense. And then this year he started a visual effects studio. And I was like, why did you do that? And he talks about it in his answer. So we'll play it during this. But Houdini is still very much like the tool for all of that stuff. And, it's still difficult to learn. I know a lot of 3D artists that they make the jump, they spend a few years struggling, they start to get it, and then they're like, I'm never going back, right?
My name is Urban Verdesco. I'm an artist / entrepreneur. I'm the founder of Double Jump Academy and also Crispy Chicken VFX. It's Double Jump Academy. It's an online place where we teach people how to do, high-end. We do high-end CGI and VFX workshops. And Crispy Chicken is a small boutique studio that specializes more in explosions. We have a bunch of proprietary tools that we made in Houdini that, they just make our explosions a bit more crispy. The reason why I opened up Crispy Chicken VFX, because almost like every week I was getting a job offer from all of these big studios, like places I would, that were my dream to work at. And I was just saying no and no all the time because I was running Double Jump full time. So I was getting so many job offers to the point where I was like, what if I just hire, because I know a lot of people, what if I just hire them and they work under my supervision? And that's how Crispy Chicken VFX was born. And now I'm talking to a lot of really, really big vendors, like top studios in the industry, to start doing work with them. When a lot of these big studios started collapsing, like Technicolor, Axis Studios, The Mill, MPC, I did a post on LinkedIn essentially saying, oh, are you guys going to open up, especially the producers, are you just going to open up a lot of smaller studios now? So instead of having one studio with 500 employees, I predicted that we're going to have 10 studios with 10 to 15 employees. And I think that's kind of happening. I did it. To put my money where my mouth is, I did it with Crispy Chicken. And I saw a lot of other studios did the same. So my prediction is that we're going to see more of that. So I think it's going to be the era of small studios and the era of freelancers for the next few years probably. And then obviously, small studios are going to form and they're going to get bigger and bigger. So for instance, with Crispy Chicken, we have like 2 or 3 people, but right now I'm talking to a lot of different studios for different projects. So the logic would be, let's grow from 3 to 15, right? So immediately you go, and then once you're at 15, you get a bigger project, and then you go to 20, 25, and then you become too big of a studio again. But I think for now, there's going to be a lot of small studios that are going to be opening up, and just a lot of freelancers or like studios that are going to have 2 or 3 people in it.
But so Houdini has also added a ton of new features this year. They're all kind of specialized things for that world. So EJ, have you messed with Houdini yet? Have you dabbled? Like, are your friends using it? I know Already Been Chewed uses it a lot. They do amazing stuff with it.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to learn Houdini, I don't think. But yeah, I think Houdini is definitely gaining ground. Plain and simple, there's things you can do that you can only do inside of Houdini. So, any advanced simulations, anything like that, there's just nothing else out there. Like Cinema 4D can do some of the things, Blender can do some things, Maya, but yeah, man, Houdini is where it's at if you really want that high-end look. And that's what, you talk about how Rive is opening a lot of things for 2D artists. Like I think Houdini's that thing for 3D, where if you know how to do the Houdini stuff, like you're getting a lot of jobs because that barrier to entry is super steep, and studios like Already Been Chewed, they're killing it because they've kind of jumped on the Houdini train like well before a lot of these other studios I feel like. And so, that's why all their stuff just looks killer, because they can do whatever they want to do. It can be done because they have the Houdini wizards on their team to be able to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, it's the talent for sure. That's the secret. Yeah.
And it takes a while.
Yeah, the tool has a learning curve.
SideFX is always pushing and creating new tools, which is great. For instance, at Crispy Chicken, we have our own proprietary tool set for shaders, explosions, just a lot of tools to make explosions look better and more realistic and organic. So inside of Houdini, you can create your own tools. So if there's something missing or you think that there's, we don't wait for SideFX to release something, because essentially they've made a software where you can create your own tools inside of it. So every studio that is using Houdini, they usually have their own pipelines and proprietary tools. In terms of new features this year, it wasn't anything super exciting for me, but They keep improving their compositing pipeline and animation pipeline, which I think is going to be a huge, and all rendering, which I think is a really, really huge thing for essentially the whole industry.
If you are on a team of 3 or more, reach out to our team so you can learn about our all-access team training program. You and your team get access to every course at School of Motion, unlimited critique on your projects, access to our 24/7 community, you get the portfolio reviews, the live workshops, you get everything. And we offer both individual and floating seats so your team admin can manage who is currently using seats on All Access. And for you admins out there, you also get a dashboard to check the progress of every member of your team that's in the program. And if you're into this sort of thing, make sure you ask us about our custom workshops that we started doing this year. They've been very, very successful, and we're going to be rolling those out even more in 2026. There is no better way to upskill your team and unlock the superpower of motion design. So reach out to our team. We are standing by to answer any questions, give you a tour, and to tailor your all-access experience for your team. All right, well, here's another tool with a learning curve. But Aaron, you seem to have, you've ascended that learning curve pretty quickly and made some crazy short films this year. And I know that this is like your current hobby horse. So why don't you tell us about Unreal this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, you talk about getting burned out. We talked about that before, and that this kind of re-injected me with a lot of vigor for what I do. If it's partially because of the real-time feedback, being able to see things immediately, but also because Unreal has just like Blender, Unreal has a very large ecosystem of not necessarily like really big plugins, but there are tools, and then there's like assets and things. There's just like, if you're not doing something, you can quickly, if you're willing to pay a couple of bucks, you can quickly have something in there and then have something to work with. And I found that, like, look, I'm not a great 3D modeler, so having these tools, having these like assets that are designed to work perfectly, or characters that are designed that are already rigged for Unreal, like that makes things a lot easier. So I would say that, so Unreal had 2 releases this year, 5.6 in May and 5.7 in November. And really, if we're being honest, it's really one release. 5.6 was rushed. 5.7, like, it was the kind of thing where like they're trying to do things faster, and they used to do like double the amount of beta time on stuff, and now it's like, now they're just doing them like 6 months apart or whatever. I don't know if that's like a planned thing of every 6 months, or if this was just how it worked out. I feel like 5.7 was a response to a bunch of stuff in 5.6 that was broken. Plus, they did add a lot of stuff in 5.7, but I feel like they were mostly there in 5.6 and couldn't get it done in time. And I feel like some of the decisions that have been made there to release things before they were ready has been, I don't know what's motivating it exactly, but you saw that with Fab, right? Fab this year when the store launched, man, what a freaking disaster, right? Like it infuriated anybody who had content that they had bought from the store. And I was like, I couldn't find my own assets, things that I paid for. I couldn't even find them in the store or find them in the browser. It was just so frustrating. It's gotten a lot better since, like especially with the release of 5.7, but they've integrated things a little bit better into the launcher. So it's like that whole experience of either browsing your own library or just buying tools and finding them is much, much better. We can talk about the motion design tools, but I'll say that it started with 5.4. I feel it was a little rough. There was a vision for it, but it's been carried through, and it's definitely filled out a lot. Is it where Cinema 4D is? Absolutely not. But it is ready for broadcast for a lot of things. It's definitely being used in broadcast now. They're really pushing hard on the real-time pipeline. I think that companies like VizRT should, I don't even know how the company still exists, but it's only because of a competitor not having one. I think that's going to be gone pretty quickly. People we've talked to have said that they've used it, and for the real time, there's this whole kind of real time broadcast pipeline, transition logic and rundown and remote, all of these things that are making it possible to run things quickly and to just throw data in and have it come up on the screen. That is going to make a big difference. So I think people wanted that. And that will, in a way, sort of open a gateway for people like, hey, if we're already using it for the live stuff, we should probably be using it for the not live stuff that goes along with it, which will then cascade. So I think Unreal's future this year is looking, I think, a lot more adoption, even though it's already definitely been adopted. I know, was it Joey? They did the was it Super Bowl, the Olympics? There was definitely some stuff.
Both, yeah.
So it's getting used in the real places that people would do these kinds of things, but. It's not going to replace, it hasn't replaced anything that you're doing with Redshift that you want it to look like super real. It's not quite there. there. They have a path tracer. They've gotten better. It's gotten better and faster. There's a denoiser that makes, because previously anything you would render with a path tracer, which is akin to Redshift or Octane, not nearly as robust, but like that you wanted realistic glass and realistic shadows and reflections that really reflected real world type situations. But it was so noisy, a lot of it wasn't usable. But now they've got a much better denoiser in there, so that's been added in. Character rigging's gotten a lot better if you're doing character work. 3D text actually, I was frustrated with it, but I discovered as I was using 5.7 recently, because it just came out and I was really kind of getting into it, I noticed there's a lot more there. It's still not even close to Cinema 4D. Like, if I'm trying to do really good-looking, stylized text, I'm actually going to Cinema 4D and then just bring it in. I lose the ability to animate some of the cool things that you can do with the motion design tools in Unreal, but like if you want a logo that looks really solid, you're not building that in Unreal, but you are using it for like text, like little plain text that you need to come up and move around. Like you can totally do that. So I think that's really cool. They filled out they had cloners. It was all sort of there, but it was like all in this one cloner, and you had to dig deep for all the different kinds of cloners. Now they've flushed them out as their own thing, even though you can use any cloner to be another kind of, you can say, oh, right now this is set to be this kind of cloner, I can just change it to the other kind, but still having it sort of default to that, like, hey, this is what it does. They added in one particular cloner that I think was super useful. Is like the I'm trying to remember the name of it now, because it's like I used it in my tutorial on like the building the light cycle. It allows you, instead of using clones, you can take an object that's in separate parts and put it in the cloner, and then all of the cloner tools that are there, such as like the effectors that can make things move around and pulsate randomly or change size, those can now work with like a regular 3D model, which is pretty cool. So like you can have an object assemble or disassemble, like if you're trying to build a car and how all the pieces come down, like you can have like a thing that comes through and then all the parts sort of just build onto it. So it's pretty cool that way, you know. They've really updated lights. There's Mega Lights, which was a beta originally. Now it's it's either, maybe it was in alpha, now maybe it's in beta, but it's like beta is already like a real thing for them. Lumen quality's gotten a lot better. They've tried to make the sequencer, because of the motion design thing, I think, especially, they've gained a lot of, there's like smooth scrubbing with audio so that you can hear what you're doing, like what you couldn't do really before. It was pretty janky. There's other stuff with virtual production, which kind of falls outside the zone of like what our users, and obviously I'm not even touching the game stuff, right? There's a lot of game stuff that we're not going to talk about. PCG, so the big things I would say, like, so nanite foliage, right? So if you don't know what nanite is, basically if you have a 3D model, there's two ways of handling, well, there's three ways. You could either suffer when you have a very detailed 3D model and it's in the background, which you don't want to do. You can use levels of detail, which you have like versions of the model that are lower detail, and that requires you have different versions of the model. And then there's nanite, which can actually like lower the quality, but not enough that it looks bad, but still using, it's very clever sort of like triangulation, and it makes it so that your faraway objects are less geometry, but they still look pretty good. And when they come close, the geometry gets multiplied, and so it looks really good up close too. And with trees and plants, they did not have any good solution for it. So if you try to populate something with plants, obviously that's like, you don't just put one plant in, you put in hundreds of plants to build a forest. That can really slow things down. And by having them now fall back onto nanites, where they can, rather than trying to go into lower LODs, which require having one model loaded and another model loaded and another model all at the same time, this allows it to like fall back on a lower geometry without the overhead hit. So it's really nice. PCG is basically like you define like how the environment should be when you place this thing in there, and then it puts the trees or plants or rocks, it spreads them across the environment based on rules that you create and deciding what goes in there. I don't love PCG because it's very hard to, it's complicated. I use tools like the dash tools, which make it super easy to just throw that stuff out there. But I reached out to them about nanite, and they said, listen, we see the nanite foliage thing. We're looking at that now and how we can integrate that into our thing. But for now, that's still only available within PCG, this system that, again, super cool, but building from scratch, not so easy, Right. You can, but hey, good news. You can go to the marketplace and buy a forest that uses PCG. Boom, you're done, right? Like really, truly, that's the beauty of it. They added in, they added an AI assistant. I have not touched that. I don't know anything. I really am curious if anyone's used it. I would love to hear if it's hallucinating in solutions or if it's really giving good solutions. Half the time I feel like with ChatGPT, I'm working with it and it's like ChatGPT trying to help me with Unreal is like having an older sibling that knows just a little more than you, but really doesn't know a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're like, hey, how do I do this? And you're trying to, that didn't work. I'm like, oh, right. You're right. Because in the latest version it did this. I'm like, nope, still not right. They're like, yeah, you know what? I may not have that correct. Let me it's very much like that. Like about 20% of the time it gets it right for the complicated stuff. And most of the time I feel like I'm just having a nice conversation with someone who knows a little more about it, but doesn't really know. So it would be really cool if their AI assistant was able to really leverage the help docs and be able to answer the questions and actually formulate not just what's in the help docs, but to be able to say like, okay, if you're doing these two things together, which there is no help doc on, can it reason it out and help you find the solution? So I would love that to be true, but I haven't tested that. And one last thing I just wanted to mention is materials. They've always had like PBR materials, but they had this new thing that kind of came out and had a lot of promise. It was substrate materials, which is like sort of layered materials. And it looked really cool, but there was literally nothing about it. Like you could barely find any instructions about it. You could download some samples. Nobody was making anything with substrate. Almost none of the materials in the marketplace. There's like one guy making one substrate thing. So, I think people don't know how to use it yet, but I think we're going to see that. It's much more complex materials that can do really interesting things, but it just never caught on in the beta phase because it's like, yeah, that's cool, but I don't know how to use it, and there's literally nothing about how to use it. So hopefully that'll be the next thing that they do.
Yeah, I feel like those AI agents may help developers more, like it can help them because there's a lot of code when you get into the game side of it.
Yeah.
I'm Dan, co-founder at Cart and Horse. In 2025, we have done a fair amount of animation work with pre-rendered animation. We kind of break it up a mix between pre-rendered and real-time. Real-time mostly has been a lot of virtual production work, but we also just do a large variety. Basically, any screen, shape, or size, we kind of pipe a lot of that through Unreal through both workflows. But anything from sports and broadcasts to immersive events to just animated videos. At least with our philosophy and how we look at it, it's power, speed, and future-proofing. Powerful between all the things they've added over the years like Nanite and Lumen and Megalights and whatever. Unreal can crunch a lot of data really quickly. Procedural tools for doing like quick landscapes or even motion or animation, even working together as a project. It's just really powerful and there's a lot you can do with it. As far as collaboration goes, working all within the same project together, we can kind of work on different pieces and they're all assembled together. That's allowed us to divide our workflow and work on the same things at the same time, which can be really nice. And in additionally, too, it's been a little slower for our adoption, but since it is a game engine and it all relies on programming, you can start to build in logic and programming and all this stuff into your workflow, which not so much procedural, but it's a different way of thinking. And there's a lot of power that goes into that as well. As far as speed goes, there's a few areas at which speed really helps us excel. Render times are pretty straightforward, although the render is not as great as Octane would be or Redshift offline, but it is crazy fast. So when we need to hammer out a lot of frames, especially if at 4K, we can render those at 6K and it can push those out pretty quickly at good quality. Also speed of the viewport. So we can kind of do our look dev and make creative decisions and tweak stuff all in real time. And we can do that together. So it allows us to make a lot of quick iterations from a speed standpoint. And one of the biggest ones is looking at this from a future-proofing perspective. Currently, we use it for a lot of work for offline rendering, and that lends itself well to pre-rendered video content. But there's also a lot of new technologies coming out that really rely on real time. So we may not be making games right at this point, but there's a lot of different experiences that can work. Virtual production's been a decent one for us where we're actually running this in real time and using this more the way that it's intended and not just relying it as a render engine. As we think like this, it just gives us a lot more options as to depending on the project that comes in. We don't have to think through different ways of delivering. We don't have to be hamstrung by just thinking that we can only output frames and that's what we have. We can be a bit more flexible with what that is without having to jump software. Even using stuff like Nanite and Lumen are not new. They're constantly adding more features that help enhance these. So Mega Lights just came out, which really opens up the doors of the amount of lights you can put in a scene without it having a huge impact, allowing you to do more and still move quickly. Mega Plants just came out. Looks super cool, having, real-time high quality plant assets that are in there. Mega Scans, Mega everything. It's just all Mega. All the Mega stuff's good. Other things as far as, kind of finding new ways to work, the control rig tools, they're constantly making those better and faster and more plug and play. Being able to control and manipulate and animate more assets in Unreal just allows less work that would have to be done in Cinema 4D or Blender and then export it out and kind of back and forth. So that opens up a lot more options in the animation front. They've also added a lot of new animation features in updates. They don't highlight them a lot, but just a lot of little quality of life improvements that make things a little more simple. As simple as you can get with that. As far as like the updates they keep making to Nanite and Lumen, they still have its issues. It's by no means perfect, and it doesn't hold up to the plug and play quality of Octane or Redshift, but they keep making it faster. They keep dialing it in more. So having that kind of span your different pipelines has been helpful as they continue to optimize it. Why has it had low adoption? It's hard. Oftentimes it can be really hard. So I think that can provide a bit of a barrier to entry. The other thing too is, if you start learning 3D from like a Cinema 4D standpoint, Unreal functions very differently. So I think you have to learn a bit of functioning like a game artist or someone who, understands that workflow a bit more. And then also there's a lot of things that could rely more on like programming. There's a lot of little gotchas and irritating things that pop up of like, why is this not working? Honestly, as much as they've come a long way with their render engine, using Lumen for lighting and even using Nanite, still has a lot of little issues that you have to troubleshoot. That being said, there's also a lot of stuff that they're still making progress on, like caustics and glass, and there's some hacks, but it still has a way to go. So compared to, Octane or Redshift or, offline renders that we've used in the past, it just doesn't do as much as you can in those. And at that point, I do think that adoption will continue to be slower until they have a real-time path tracer, which appears to be coming. But without a solid path tracer, I do think that's going to hold things up a bit.
I'm Chris, co-founder of Cart and Horse, a small design studio based out of Michigan. We're utilizing Unreal and the pipeline, as well as lots of pitching, quick renders, pitch decks, things just with the asset libraries out there, with Fab or CG Trader or Sketchfab, or to be honest, Kitbash and the Grayscale Gorilla. We can get things into an Unreal scene really quickly and pipe out renders or do live working sessions with directors or clients, and they are really impressed. What I've noticed as far as differences in this last year of types of expectations or things from clients or directors is almost getting more and faster, but not necessarily more expensive. I wouldn't say necessarily cheaper, but I don't know if it's the impact of AI and image generation or just knowing that there's real-time tools out there, as well as just, I don't know, like GPUs and things getting faster so people can create content quicker and the tools being more accessible. But I know that getting it fast, getting visuals up and reference and seeing what potentially this could look like, whether for pitches or client approvals, it seems like the expectations of getting something looking nice quicker is more than it ever has been in the past. So that applies not necessarily because they're Unreal projects, but just projects in general. Although Unreal does help us get there faster, it's almost like cheating. Like you get lighting and materials quicker than you ever would with gray renders with the traditional pipeline because you can render those things fast out of Unreal versus, well, I'm not going to render this in 4K with like really nice lighting out of Redshift. You might get a 540 version and it's going to look like crap, but you'll get the idea. So now in Unreal, it's like, well, I want yeah, I want this to look better, and why can't this look like almost final out of the first draft, or even during the concepting phases. I mean, real time is kind of a big deal, and we're wondering how it's going to seriously impact the industry. And I guess it's just in general impacting the production pipeline in a major way for us right now, as well as, to be honest, it's very similar. It's just different. It's like just different way to cut it. Jumping into Unreal wasn't like starting a new language. It was just what's this new way to speak, or the way to deliver the things that I kind of already know. I guess I would compare it to maybe building a house or doing a home remodel. If you had, you had a hammer and nails and, different tools, and then you found out about power tools or a different type of power tools, then you might approach the thing differently. But it's still the same concept of building the walls and running the wires and these types of things. Like, that doesn't change. But the learning in Unreal, being that it's a game engine, has been kind of a completely different battle, if you will, or game, understanding LODs or the lighting system and Lumen and how to optimize these settings and kind of control that with Nanite and virtual textures and different source control, how to get assets in and out of the pipeline, or how to get assets in and out of the tool migration, tweaking textures and UVs, adjusting models and topology. All these things, there's lots of different considerations for how the pipeline works, how the tool works, and what it's made to do. Compared to Cinema 4D or After Effects or even Blender, Unreal projects seem big, they seem heavy, they're slow to open. It seems like it crashes a lot. What I need as a motion designer is often like ease of use. I need the feel of the tool. I need to noodle. I need to iterate and improvise. I want things to be procedural. I like effectors working with the cloners and parenting. I like plugins that make things just have sliders, and all these things are capable in Unreal. It's just definitely been different in how to get there. And to be honest, the tool is still getting there. I know that there's been lots of advancements over the last few years and these tools that are being adopted. And things like making things feel cinematic, easy presets, or just simplicity, speed, and minimal technical hurdles. That in general just doesn't exist. And to be honest, the one thing that's been in the back pocket for Unreal has been the community and then the networking with people and asking questions in forums to solve problems.
I feel like Unreal is kind of right at the cusp of being able to, when we went to CBS Sports and they were really interested in Unreal, they're using it for a lot of different things. And I was kind of quizzing them. I was like, so what would it take for you to like switch? Because I can't remember what system they use for their live stuff, Chiron or VizRT, but
yeah,
those are the two big ones. And, I've talked to a lot of people that use those systems, and they're, in a way, they remind me of like when flames were a big thing, right? Like in our industry where they're super powerful, they can do a lot of stuff, but they exist on this island away from Adobe and away from all the kind of standardized ways that we do everything now. And so you have to have this very specialized knowledge, and it only accepts these kinds of file formats, and the hardware, you can't just go buy hardware for it. It's specialized. And, Unreal, you can call Puget or you can go to Best Buy. You can like get a system that'll run it. Yeah. And it's really just about making the software, because I think it honestly, if you're clever enough, probably can do most of what you need it to do to run a live broadcast now. It's just the way you have to build stuff is not, it's not intuitive.
Yeah, it's still too game design oriented, the software, but the tools are now there, which they weren't before. And that's, I think, the thing to think about is that like 2 years ago, they didn't have the tools in there at all. Now the tools are there. They're still not simple to use, but they are getting easier. And there's templates that one can build, or, that you can maybe hire somebody to build for you that will make that even easier. And, they're not showing any signs of stopping to develop those tools. I mean, I would love to see text I would love to see them do some real work on text, because text is just too important for motion design to not have those tools in there. It can do a lot of basics that you already need, but I still think that you're going to be modeling like logos and stuff outside of Unreal and bringing that in. It would be cool if they could do more there to allow motion design to really take place, the design part of motion design take place in there, as opposed to the animation part of motion design.
Yeah. One interesting thing that I feel like this probably adds way more complexity, but RIVE files work inside of Unreal. So you can have a RIVE file on a plane or any piece of geometry. You can wrap it, doesn't matter. And you can trigger, like anything you want. You can change the type out. And, RIVE has like one of the fastest 2D renderers on Earth. Unreal, everything that looks 2D isn't actually 2D. It's 3D, like on a plane, or it's a texture on something. There's probably some interesting things that could be done with a very technical, clever person to combine those two tools to give you the things you would need. For a broadcast package, maybe some of the type is 3D, but a lot of it's 2D,
It's funny though. I would never have pegged Unreal to get SVGs in before Adobe, which Adobe did this year.
Yeah, it did this year.
Right, like that's pretty weird.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can use SVGs to generate 3D geometry. It's essentially like an Illustrator file with all the splines and stuff. But After Effects only got it like a couple of months ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. Like that was like. How do they not have that? And I'm betting that the reason it finally went in there is because there's intention to use it for 3D to be able to extrude it in the next iteration of the 3D in After Effects. That's probably why they did it. But for over a year, Unreal, a program that does not generally you think of using like that format, it had it in there, and so you can do some cool stuff with SVGs there too.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're talking to Mr. Winbush. I know he's been a little bit delayed on his next course because we're kind of waiting for the motion design tools to stabilize enough. But there will be yet another Unreal course out, hopefully soon. Okay, so I'm going to blast through these last ones. These are tools that I don't think a ton of people are using. They should probably be on your radar. There might be some use cases for them. The first one is Lottie Lab. I already mentioned it. So Lottie Lab is just a web-based tool where you can create simple animations, and they export natively to Lottie. And, the good thing about it, first of all, it's very simple to use, right? So if you're not an After Effects artist already, you can learn Lottie Lab very quickly. It's not very complicated. Also, there is still this issue with After Effects creating Lottie files, even with the Lottie Files plugin, which helps you, is that because of the way After Effects works, certain things that look correct in your viewport will not translate correctly to Lottie files. There's workarounds, and most of this stuff has been fixed through the plugins, but if you had a shape that had a hole in the middle, that hole would disappear when you export to a Lottie file, right? It wouldn't calculate the clipping path correctly. And so you have to double check everything when you're making a Lottie file from After Effects. With Lottie Lab, you don't. If it looks correct, it's going to be correct. And the reason I bring it up is because I'm seeing a ton of front-end designers, UI, UX, product designers using it. And, coming from the world of linear motion design where you need all of the power that After Effects gives you, I look at something like that and my instinct is, why would I use that, right? Why would anyone use it? Just learn After Effects. But, given what we were talking about hours ago now, motion design is a toolbox that now a lot of different people are carrying around to very different places than we're used to. And they don't necessarily need After Effects. And why would you learn After Effects if you don't have to? If you're just mostly working in Figma, designing interfaces, but you want a very custom animation, Lottie Lab does that for you. And so there's probably opportunities out there for people who know After Effects who could learn Lottie Lab in, I don't know, a day. And get that kind of work. And also, I think there's, hopefully those designers and those developers realize at some point you still need to know how to animate, right? Because those skills kind of translate one-to-one. It doesn't matter what app you're in. There's also Simulon, which finally launched. Aaron, have you played with Simulon since it launched?
Not since I was really loving the stuff they were posting. I haven't used it. I do want to because it's actually It's pretty freaking cool.
It's
like
amazing,
the
yeah.
compositing aspect, like getting 3D into an app and using ARV, like that kind of thing. You hold up your phone and you can see, like Amazon. If I want to see what furniture looks like in my room or a 3D model looks in my office, I can do that. But the level of compositing is absolutely bonkers that they have in that app.
Yeah. Well, the full vision of it, and if you want like a deep dive, we interviewed the founder, I think last year, Devesh, brilliant dude. And the full vision of it is crazy to me, and it's brilliant. I think there is some AI in it, but mostly they're just being very clever with all the sensors and everything that the phone gives you. Basically, the idea is you want a dinosaur to run through your living room. You don't know how to do that. Well, you can take the Simulon app, and you can basically get a scan of your living room. You can send that to a Blender artist who can animate a dinosaur running through your living room, and you can kind of tell it, okay, I think the camera's going to be here, so make sure it runs past that. And then they can send that to you. You can go back in your living room and hit record, and it's if you're recording live a dinosaur walking through your room. And you can literally shoot it as if it's there. It's almost like virtual production, but kind of in reverse. And then when you're happy with the camera shot and what you got, you hit a button and it uploads it to the cloud, and you can capture an HDRI, and it renders. I think it's actually using Blender on the back end. To create the scene and render it, and it creates compositing and all of these things. And then you can basically gives you a composited, fully done shot after that. But you can also then get the Blender file and go in and change it if you want to. It's a really neat way of thinking about doing visual effects that it's pretty innovative, right? And what's cool about it to me is it's one of those things where, all of us have some origin story of the gateway drug that got us into this, right? Like I saw Jurassic Park, that led me to visual effects, that led me to editing, that led me to motion design, right? And everybody watching this, and both of you will have your own version of that. Simulon is going to do that for a lot of young people because it's that easy to use. And they're setting it up so that even if you don't know someone who can model an animated dinosaur, they have pre-built things that are automatically animated, and you can make your own scene, and it looks real, and it's smart enough to do rotoscoping and all those things. It's kind of like Wonder Dynamics in a way, but even easier. So I think that's amazing. If you're unfamiliar with it, you can go check it out. I recently saw a post from like a design technician developer at Disney who's just raving about it. So I don't know if it'll make its way into like the really high-end professional stuff like that. It certainly seems capable of it, given that it in the end, it gives you like a Blender file or whatever you need to then change it and recomposite it and do whatever you gotta do. Spline. So EJ, you were like big on the Spline train last year. And then they launched Hana, which is like their 2D. It's almost like their answer to Rive. It's a different tool. It's not built to do the same things, but it's pretty cool. But I haven't heard much from Spline, like the 3D Spline app that they were initially known for. Have you heard anything?
Yeah, I mean, they added a timeline, and so you can now do basic animations and have, stuff trigger more complex animations than just like scale 50%, and that's all it does. So, and then they have added with Hana, you can build like how you can make full games inside of Rive now. I think you can build somewhat interactive games inside of Spline as well, all 3D, and a lot more interactive tools that go way beyond like mouse over events and stuff like that. So they are building in there. That's the thing that interests me is like, would Rive have any interest in getting into the 3D space and like importing 3D objects into their, like kind of like how After Effects is allowing for that? I don't know, because if so, it kind of makes Spline kind of moot at this point. But at this point, if you want to do any 3D interaction stuff, it's Spline is the way to go for sure because it's easy to use.
Yeah, I've heard from Webflow developers that they like Spline, and maybe this has gotten better, but like just whenever you're using something on the web, whether it's a Rive file or a Lottie file or whatever, you have to load that file, and I'm sure a Spline file isn't that big. You also have to load the code that plays back the Spline file. And that is actually a lot of memory. The Rive player is very small, and that's why developers like it, because you can add a Rive. You load it once, and you can load 20 Rive files, and Rive files are typically small, so it loads almost instantly. If it's on an iPhone app or something like that, it doesn't matter. It's just going to load off a hard drive really quickly. But for Spline, because it was aimed mostly at the web space initially, you can use it in products and apps too. But it was aimed at the web space, and I think the extra bandwidth it takes to download that Spline player was actually kind of an issue. In terms of the interaction stuff, it's really cool, actually, and it's much easier to learn and use than Rive. Rive is built to let you do anything. And, it's kind of like Houdini, right? Like, with that power comes more complexity, and there's always a balance. And Rive has kind of, I think, found a really good balance where it's not the easiest thing to pick up. You kind of do need to be taught it, I think, especially if you're an animator. If you're a developer, maybe it's a little more intuitive. Spline is built a different way. It's built where it's very click and, you can click to select the interaction, and it's much simpler. You can't do nearly as much, but you can do some complicated things. Hana is interesting to me because the last thing I heard about Hana, which is basically another app Spline launched, that looked initially like they were trying to kind of compete with Rive a little bit, was that you can now use 3D assets with it too. So now it's a 2D and 3D real-time app. And they've kind of leaned a little bit more into like these neat filters. Like there's a progressive blur filter that Rive currently doesn't have. And you can make it look like glass, and you can add chromatic aberration and these neat effects. And it's all real time. It uses a different rendering technology than Rive. So it's cool. I haven't seen or heard of really any opportunities for motion designers for that yet. I think it's still pretty niche in the web design space. Something to look out for. Another company that I haven't really heard about in a while is Womp. I know they added 3D printing last year, so you could model something in Womp, 3D print it. There was a course I think Motion Design School came out with last year or early this year where they showed you how you can bring a Womp model into After Effects using the new 3D system, which is kind of cool. Maybe there's some animation features coming to Womp soon, but I haven't heard really much about it. I'm guessing it's one of those VC stories where maybe they're starting to think they're not going to get a return. They're starting to turn off the money spigot. I don't really know. Have you heard anything, EJ?
I had a chat with the CEO of Womp like earlier this year because they just launched the 3D printing service, and I was like, oh, like let me learn more about that. And I think I did like a short video for them too. I did a full-blown tutorial on Womp on School of Motion. And one of the interesting stories was she said that like the web 3D thing was basically a side thing because what they really wanted to do was become this 3D printing service, which was interesting. So like the 3D printing thing was something they wanted to do all along where they can like prefab stuff and make it really easy. So what's really cool is like if you don't have to buy a 3D printer, if you don't want to get into resin and deal with chemicals and stuff, like you can basically using the service build your 3D model or import it into the Womp browser app, and then you basically prep it for printing and you send them the file, you press print, and then like a week or so later you get your 3D model, like your 3D print.
That's awesome.
Physical 3D print in your hand. So I think it's really cool that they're like making that kind of 3D printing accessible. I can see that they're trying, like, we don't really work in this world, but for like, prefab or like testing prototypes and stuff, like it's a really easy way to get that in your hands super quick and super affordably too. Cause otherwise you're paying some company in China and you have to do like, the barrier to entry to just create a mold is super expensive. So, if you're into 3D printing, like, I would give Womp a spin, but I think they announced that animation features are coming soon too. I think it's a fun app to mess with, to create 3D models, and they got the little Wompy blob kind of modeling thing, and basically I think, Project Neo from Adobe's kind of ripping them off in that respect too, because you can kind of, it's almost like modeling with clay and things just kind of goop and blend together. So it's a super fun app, but as far as MoGraph goes, it's still super niche, I would say.
Yeah. It seems far more like a toy, for like professional art or something like that. It's interesting. I didn't know that you had that conversation, and that now it kind of makes a little more sense because feature-wise, it didn't seem like they were aiming at like you're going to be able to use this in like video games and 3D projects. It is really what's the technology? It's called signed distance fields, SDF modeling, where it's somehow different than hard surface modeling, where it mushes things together and then calculates a mesh around it, which is cool, and you can get more organic stuff a lot easier. I think I've said this before on the podcast, but like, EJ has a 3D printer and he turned me on to that one. I bought it for my son last year. This year he doesn't know yet because Hanukkah hasn't happened as of this recording, but we got him the 4-color material system for it, so now he can print multiple colors. Nice. But I've tried to get him into modeling his own stuff because he mostly just prints things that already exist. And 3D modeling is really hard. WOMP is not hard. Like, you can make something with googly eyes and 2 little legs pretty easily. So that's kind of cool, actually. And I think that's one of the things that maybe people that don't follow like the way businesses get started sometimes, like it can be weird when you hear stuff like that. Companies like WOMP that raise millions of dollars, a lot of times they start with a vision. That vision is secondary to get the investors' money, right? And so if it turns out this isn't actually the direction that's going to do that, they pivot. And, we've seen that a lot. Like Lottie Lab has investors behind them, and they went on this side quest to try and make an AI auto animation thing for Figma. This is terrible. It's awful. Like, it's completely unusable. I say that with all love to the team. It's just really bad. And trying to do some other stuff with AI. And I suspect a lot of that came from an investor saying, hey, what are you doing with AI? Hey, this thing's like we're still burning a lot of cash on this thing. So maybe there's something going on like that with WOMP. Speaking of modeling, so we'll talk about the 2 modeling tools on the list. And this is another one you turned me on to, EJ, Nomad Sculpt, which I got into this year.
Yeah.
Dude, I love it. Like, it's so fun. Talk about Nomad Sculpt a little bit. I don't know if it's updated this year, but like, I think some of those things a lot of people don't know about, and it is infinitely easier to learn than ZBrush and fun and get you into modeling.
Yeah, it is super fun. This past year, they added a lot to the UI, so it's a lot easier to access things. And I believe they have like I can't remember when they added it, but you can do like UV unwrapping and stuff like that. They're slowly like trying to create parity of like ZBrush is on the far like complexity end and power end, and Nomad's on the lower end of like, it's not very powerful, but it's really easy to use and can do a lot and has really great sculpting tools. And so I think Nomad's trying to add like new sculpting brushes and stuff like that. But yeah, it's so easy to use. It's got, honestly, I'm surprised that ZBrush for iPad doesn't function like Nomad Sculpt, because what Nomad Sculpt does, and probably why it clicked so easy for you and for a lot of people that maybe are familiar with Cinema 4D, is it has a very similar object manager to Cinema 4D, where you have null objects and you can group objects underneath that null object, and that's a group, and you can move that stuff around. And so it's so much easier. Like ZBrush, you can't do that. If you want to, you can't create groups together unless it's destructive, or if you want to select multiple things, it's like click this button and then click this, and then it's a temporary group, and oh my God. Yeah. But yeah, I really enjoy Nomad Sculpt. It got me into sculpting. It got me into 3D printing, because before I just, I would pick up ZBrush and my brain would melt out of my ear. But they did just announce that they have a desktop version, which I don't get the GitFab, the GitHub, whatever the hell, you got to like download the app GitHub, like some certain GitHub, unpacked way and figure it out. And I'm like, I don't know. So I think they have like a desktop version that's in beta. But Nomad Sculpt, I believe, is just like one dude. So they're not very great at promoting what they're doing or anything like that. But for anyone that wants to get into sculpting, or if you want to get into 3D printing stuff and you got an iPad, like I love Nomad Sculpt for sure. ZBrush for iPad is getting there, but...
Yeah, I just wanted to call it out because, I've never been a 3D modeler. 3D is like my second language, like 2D is my first. And sculpting always, especially, I used ZBrush a little bit at my studio, and it for very specific things, because like it's so hard to you can't just figure it out. Like you have to be told how to do everything. And Nomad Sculpt, also because it's on a tablet, it's just, there's something about gestural sculpting that feels so different than like using a mouse. And you can sculpt in C4D a little bit. It's got some of the same concepts, but you just don't make the same stuff as when you're sitting there and you're rotating it around with your finger while you're doing this with a pencil, and it's pretty awesome. It's a totally new discipline to me. I'm not good at it. And you kind of have to think about it's different than 3D modeling. You don't do things quite the same way. But if anyone's into 3D, especially like 3D artists that aren't using sculpting tools a lot, for $20, this is like the gateway drug. It's really cool, especially if you have a 3D printer. Yeah. Because then it exports to GLTF and all those formats really easily too.
Yep. Yeah, and ZBrush for iPad, for anyone that uses that, they just this year announced they're adding export for STL, I think, for 3D printing too. So yeah, that's kind of on the way. But yeah, it's a good time to be getting into any kind of 3D sculpting because you have a lot of options available to you. But yeah, Nomad I love.
Yeah, and so the big ZBrush news was the iPad app, right? And now they've announced some more stuff for desktop.
Yeah, the Z modeler came to iPad, which is a big deal because that's one of the things where it's like, yeah, Nomad sculpt's great, but you can only do organic modeling. There's no hard surface kind of stuff in there, which I don't know. I never feel like I need to do any hard surface stuff. But yeah, ZBrush has Z modeler, and then one of the biggest pieces of news that has been in demand, like the highest request for probably a decade or longer, was what you alluded to, which is ZBrush's UI has to be one of the worst, most convoluted UIs in modern applications. And they ZBrush team announced that they kind of learned a lot developing the UI for the iPad, ZBrush for iPad, and they're kind of taking those learnings and they're going to totally refresh the ZBrush for desktop UI UX. So that's super exciting.
Well, EJ, my understanding is that, like, I can't even remember where I saw this. There was like a discussion about it, but my understanding is that they will let you, at least in the first iteration, switch between the two UIs.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that, they learned how to do things the hard way, and God damn it, don't you screw that up.
I mean, they have a 20-year history of giving away updates for free, so they're going to have people who've been using it for whatever. Now there's no more free updates, which is just one of the many problems that you have when you get acquired by a publicly traded company. You just can't do that anymore. So there's laws actually that, like, we can get into it, but there's laws that's why subscription is such a better deal.
Yeah. Well, when we get to the AI thing, I think we'll probably come back to that idea of I learned to do it the hard way and now it's easy, I'm mad. So we'll get into that. All right, so that's most of the software that I feel like I probably cut like 5 or 6 from the list because they just weren't used enough. Yeah. But God, there's a lot of software. I bet this time next year there's gonna be more to talk about. Maybe autographs out. So we're going to talk about some industry news and trends that's going to lead us into talking about the economy, which is going to lead us into talking about AI. So this is going to be a little bit all over the place, okay? But these are just some things that I've noticed that people have said to me, some interesting, things that happened this year. So one, and we'll talk more about this in the economy section, but this is one of those things that I think most artists that, maybe you work at a company or maybe you're freelancing, you've got your clients, you don't really think about this stuff. But this has been a trend for a decade plus now, which is ad industry consolidation. Okay, so sounds really boring. So basically what that means is, like, I remember coming up in Boston where you had like 4 or 5 big ad agencies, and a couple of those were worldwide, meaning they had New York office, London office, right? And then you had a bunch of these tiny ones, right? And so what would happen is you had all these different kinds of clients you could work with. You could work with the big one, and they'd pay you a lot, but they'd beat you up and all that kind of stuff. You could work with the small one. They always had less money, but they were friendlier, more fun to work with. Maybe they'd give you more creative freedom. And there's just been this trend, and it's not just in advertising, it's in a lot of things, of consolidation. You've got larger ad agencies swallowing smaller ones. You've got holding companies like Publicis acquiring like big ad agencies. And so now you've got these ad agency conglomerates that, maybe like take up 10% of the ad agency world, right? Like for one company. And so, okay, so what does that mean for artists on the ground doing work? Okay, so these are some thoughts that we got from some of the guests that we asked to contribute this year. And, you know, these are studio owners, these are people that work with freelancers, like they're experiencing the effects of this and reporting back to us so we can tell you this is happening, and then later on we'll talk about like kind of what to do about it. The biggest trend, and this came up a lot, is that artists, especially older ones, you're trained to spend weeks perfecting one thing, right? That's kind of like the old, that's how we're used to working, right? I remember freelancing and spending a month on one commercial and just dialing in everything and really looking at the details, and you're on render version 27 of this shot, right? And now it seems like there's a trend, and this is what I'm being told, and I don't think this will surprise anybody, that now it's more like we need hundreds of good enough variations of this thing. And so this term was, this kind of like broke my brain a little bit. The craft-focused mindset becomes a liability rather than an asset, right? So if you're the kind of person that loves to nuance over the details, there's still work like that out there. There's still prestige projects. But even studios like Swarovski, Aaron's on this podcast, you know, they've done Marvel movie main title sequences, and they're being asked, the quality doesn't need to be that high. Can you just make more of it?
Hi, I'm Erin Swarovski, owner and creative director at Swarovski. The big holding companies are continuing to like gobble everything up. And I think it's a big race to some end that has nothing to do with creative. It has to do with the AI bubble and media buying. So also, like, what is even media buying anymore? I know that obviously people make a lot of money doing it, but everything is so dispersed. It's very hard to create creative that is going in so many different places in so many different ways. And as a result, we've really seen the diminishing of really big brands. We've seen total shift from like brand popularity to personality popularity to people being popular. And I think just as an industry, we're going to have to kind of watch it implode. And what I think will happen as a result is that there will be like a real rise of kind of old school agencies, the independent agencies that develop personal relationships with brands and clients and really make them be able to stand out in what is a very average landscape of work and communication about brands and their personalities. So while I think we're watching a massive implosion, I also think there is an amazing amount of opportunity for people to like develop relationships with brands, with like CMOs and key figures at brands to do creative work that really stands out, because the work across the board that we're seeing come out is like aggressively average or below average.
So I'm curious, EJ, if you're hearing anything like that from your studio buddies, other artists. Aaron, does this track with you? I mean, I don't feel like this is a new trend, but it came up a lot from our guests this year. So EJ, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I'm wondering what change, because my skepticism with all of this is the good enough, and I see that it's like maybe for internal stuff, but like I've never met a client where good enough is good enough. It's always, you got to change this one thing, you got to tweak this. Can I see, like I've seen the like I need a variation of XYZ. Can I see that? Like I could see that's where AI could help out a lot. The only way this makes sense for me is if the client understands that things are much cheaper to do, and so they're not willing to pay to get that higher end thing. But also on the other end, my client experience is they don't give a shit if they're spending $600 or $6,000. They want the best goddamn thing you can make, and good enough was never good enough. So that's my big pushback with all the like AI can get it good enough, which do clients just not have the eye for it, where maybe AI looks like shit to us, the trained artist eye, but to them actually does look good enough? And is that the missing piece?
Or is it not the clients at all, but is it the people consuming it outside the who are just watching it? Like we came back to this what we talked about last year was like, is what we think is not good enough going to be just totally fine? I mean, I see what my kids watch on YouTube and I realize that like I can't get them. It's really hard to get them to watch narrative of any kind, but they'll watch, a guy screaming playing a video game, and it's like, that's good content. So I don't even know anymore, man.
Well, so maybe here's a way to kind of like think about this, right? So what my mind goes to is when I was freelancing, kind of like at, I guess, the peak of my freelance career, I would do these projects that were internal videos for Bank of America through an ad agency that like maybe 50 people at the company were going to see. And they'd spend $30,000 on it, and they'd beat me up over the transitions and it was fully animated, 2-minute long thing with voiceover and music and sound, like everything, right? And like, the work wasn't award winning, but I put a lot of work into it, and it was way more high end than I imagine those jobs kind of look like now. And I guess the market force that we're being told is driving this is ad industry consolidation, right? So when you're a solo ad agency, you want to make money, but there's also this big drive to win awards and to do work you're proud of and to give your juniors a chance to become seniors and do things to push them. When you're owned by a holding company, you're a line on a spreadsheet, right? Now that's kind of the very extreme like story I could tell about this, but that trend has just kind of been continuing, and I think that this kind of leads into our AI discussion later. But we also heard from a lot of people that AI is not capable of making good enough stuff all by itself, right? Like it can be used and is being used by 100% of people we talk to try to help do things faster and maybe even scale creative variations a little bit, because you can do that now. But the perception that the bean counters have is that shouldn't this be cheaper now? Shouldn't we be able to get 5 versions of this for what we paid for 1 version last year?
My name is PJ Richardson. I'm the ECD director and co-founder at Laundry, based out of LA. And also by night, digital artist, 3D enthusiast, and maker of all kinds of colorful things. We see this come up over and over and over with AI. Listen, it's always a game of like, do a lot faster and cheaper than any other time, with or without AI. But with AI in particular, what we have seen is that I think people think that they can do it faster and cheaper. They try, they convince clients to. It's not great. It looks very AI. It doesn't get over the uncanny valley, but they can't fix it. We get a lot of calls like that of being like, hey, we went with this other vendor with AI. But now can you make it good? Or the other, and the big misnomer, and we hear it from agencies and we've experienced it ourselves, is that AI doesn't save you time or money. Maybe 5 or 10% if you're lucky, but often it costs a lot more and takes a lot more time.
And so this trend, there's another kind of insight here for prestige artists. And I would imagine, those are the people that, like the names, the Ariel Kostas, people like that, who've probably avoided most of this so far. The entire value proposition is excellence. You're going to hire me. I'm going to cost more than the other person. But you're going to get something excellent, right? You could submit this to an award. It's going to make you look really good. Your profit margin won't be as high on this project as if you hired somebody else. But, you want that quality. And now I think PJ said something like the market is actively selecting for mediocrity at scale. I don't think he said it exactly like that, but like I've heard that from enough people now where I'm like, okay, I guess this is kind of a thing. Now I suspect this is really impacting legacy motion design vendors who are used to being able to like really craft award-winning stuff and all of that. And now it's just another marketing channel, for these big brands, and the holding company that's paying for it wants to pay less. So I don't really know where I'm going.
Joey,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's funny. There's a thing that went through my head just now is like where, you say you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it, what is it? You can have it good, good. But one of those, you pick two, you can't have all three. And I'm like, and they're like, well, it turns out that they want it fast and cheap. We're like, oh, really? You want that? Oh.
Yeah.
Like, that's not really that's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
Right?
They used to want all three. They used to insist on all three, even if you were only giving them two. But yeah, right. it sounds like.
But now if you're making them choose, they're like, it seems like they're choosing,
Yeah.
I mean, the two you don't, at least one of the ones you don't expect to pick.
Yeah. So I know that this is very unevenly distributed, but Swarovski, PJ from Laundry, he said, his budgets are down sometimes 40%, right, from where the same project would have been last year. And so you can still do it, but something has to give. And so, one thing is the caliber of talent that you can put on it, right? Like if you have a junior artist, you can put them on it. You can't go hire G-Monk to co-direct the thing, like that kind of thing. And it seems like clients are becoming more okay with that. Now, my instinct about this, okay, and this is where I'd love your take is, and Aaron asked this question: what even is media buying anymore? Because, you've got marketing budget that has to be allocated, right? And when we all got into our career, a significant portion of that would be into videos that would either go on like TV, cable network, eventually the internet. Now it's spread way thinner. Even look at like where School of Motion spends money on marketing, right? We have a lot of like ads we run, right? These little thumbnails ads that run on social media platforms. And for what we pay for those, we could put out 2 School of Motion manifesto videos a year, right? Like, and hire a badass studio to do it. But that doesn't give us the ROI of having Instagram ads, or Facebook ads. And I think that's a big part of it. So Aaron, I'm curious about like, how do you feel about, really, you've got a finite amount of marketing budget, and for better or worse, if your goal is to get people to buy shit, the beautiful 30-second prestige commercial or 60-second Super Bowl ad costs as much as like, 1 million impressions of a Facebook ad.
So we struggle. You struggle with that every day. When you're an artist, you struggle with the idea of producing work that's not good because that's what it's going to take to get it done. But I always come back to that, that 80, 90, 100% rule, right? The 80%, getting it 80% quality is easy, but getting it to 100%, it takes twice as much work as getting it to 80%. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about it, like we all, like, there's a lot of anger and around AI that's related to the ethical aspects of it. And a lot of it is about, well, this is crap. But, what's funny is that people love resharing that kind of thing, which costs like a few bucks to make, right? And they love resharing it because it hits you and it doesn't cost anything to make that for the most part and still have an impact and have people remember something. And so there's a lot of that going on, which is just that, if you can get people's attention for a few minutes and it doesn't cost you as much, like as before you made something beautiful and it also only got people's attention for a few minutes, why do it expensively, right? I want to see cool things. Me personally, I want to work on cool things and I want to see cool things. But realistically, the whole, like, just again, like where people watch their stuff, their YouTube, whatever, it's not geared towards a high level of quality, right? So making ads for TV and film, something that might show up before a movie or whatever, fine, but I think that like there's so much else in the market where you can put your product or put your stuff that does not need that level of quality. It's just really that simple.
I think that in general, we're seeing budgets go down by at least 40%, which is insane because, our budgets are our budgets, or they have been historically, because that money is required to produce that work. Very few studio owners have yachts, right? So we're all just normal people trying to make a living as well and pay people well. And so as we see like budgets tighten up, you'll see definitely studio owners and studios in general starting to tighten the amount of time they can spend on jobs, the level of talent they can put on jobs. And you're going to see a lot more negotiating with freelancers and vendors beneath them and all of that, like that come later in the process. That's what I mean by beneath, because I look at it as like a process or a pipeline. So it is going to be an interesting couple of years. I do hope that the value of our work nudges back north, or we're all going to have to find a way to position ourselves as super premium and basically do less for more, which is a great idea in theory.
Well, Joel Pilger kind of has an answer